coming back from the edge of doomerism. Always coming back from the edge of doomerism. I think it's somewhat of a public duty to pay attention to things of public note and significance, but also not to, again, over focus on the bad. You could take a whole, in your week, your work week, take at least one day where you can just think about what would be optimal conditions and how could things be done better, and just stay in that realm without any type of cantankerousness or even comparisons with what is now the case, which might be very disappointing on some level. And yet, finally, why do people get caught up in these questions if they're not personally invested in some type of material outcome other than the well-being of all people in one's own country or cultural area of commonality? See, I like using Western civilization because a lot of Western countries have a lot more in common than they have disagreements with one another. But unfortunately, there are a lot of power politics being played by people that just play it for their own enrichment, and it's a tactical move that is not for the best interest of the country. So what do? They do bad things. Well, what makes them? Well, that makes them bad people. That's what you're looking at, essentially, with all neutrality. No names, depersonalize. The cashier that's skimming money out of the register is not the same as a cashier that doesn't do that. That's why the store is going to go bankrupt. And then nobody in the neighborhood is going to be able to get access to groceries. They'll have to walk or drive 3 miles to the other place because that one person decided to make things work for them. Essentially, that's what you're looking at in the form of a potential government that thinks that way, i.e. the people that are stuck in that way of thinking. So let's also just think of the potentiality of how good your country can get if it gets a better government. Like, just that right there should keep you well out of doomerism, because it absolutely is true. You unleash all the creative powers, all the good things, you can organize them instead of fighting the worldly game with worldly people that don't see it that way. That think what you're talking is just a version of what they would say if they were you. But they're not genuine, are they? So how could they see the true motives of a person that isn't self-interested? And yet schemers and intelligent people that they think they are, especially the malignant narcissist among them, or big babyists if you want to look at it in a more funny way, which is also pretty accurate. Just think of a big baby in human form and how they harden on ideas and positions, and this works for me, so I don't want people touching it. Don't want a reorganization. The people that I'm paying out to, they don't want a reorganization either, you see? So that's what you're up against, essentially. And they don't really care about their public image all too much if they're coming out with counterintuitive policies on a continuous basis that are deeply unpopular and wasteful. So I don't think very much speaks for them in real terms, but again, if they can maintain some alternative reality for themselves, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Maybe they can just go away and it'll be a nice, peaceful, civilized transition, as it should be. When old management gets out and new management does something else with the resources that are available, which may be considerably less than when the incumbent government came into power and essentially frittered away the good things and increased the bad things. So, but of course, no government's perfect. There's no perfect situation on earth, but at the same time, why not do the right thing, all things considered, and not the wrong thing? Why not remain a human being that is compassionate and generous and well-meaning for the world, despite all of the things that aren't all that great all the time, which we can get caught up in pretty easily if we decide to over focus on the agitatory things. So that's another thing that meditative prayer can get you, is getting yourself out of adversarial or frictional or fictional constructs of the mind that might frame things in a losing fashion when in fact why not think of victory as inevitable? Victory of the good over the bad. Why not think in those terms? It's a lot more dynamic, isn't it? Like lots of bad things happen, but in the end, right? The good thing won all of a sudden. Surprisingly so. And so then good things happened, or more good things happened than bad things happening as a result of a bad catalyst, you see? But good and bad, over time, is it good, bad, or is it always neutral? And here's also something that one has to think, that by removing a bad government, which essentially might only be 1,000 people, replacing them with competent people with the right values, then everyone will benefit from that. Let's just entertain the rather wild idea that the people that we're bringing in are not doing it to steal, but rather to distribute. Let's just entertain the thought that it's possible to find people that think and act that way. How much better will everybody profit by that? Even the people that that retire, that they obviously will vicariously benefit from all of that excess goodness that one can put into motion with good acts and deeds and planning and understandings and practicings, that one can take the ascendant trajectory and lift off and stay afloat and then land where one wants to land and not land where one chooses not to land. Another way of looking at things is that if you have a general, it's general versus general, then the generals, they're organizing their militaries in such a way to defeat the other generals. But if the other side can defeat you socially, which is to say politically, that you would do the dumb things and not the smart things, that you would be engaging with noise instead of signal, then essentially you're talking about disrupted logistics that are allowed to be disrupted by people that are just playing games essentially and not rising to the occasion of problem solving in the face of a genocidal adversary. So if we look at the narcos, yeah, the narco is someone who is not playing by the rules. So if someone wants to remedy that situation, one has to stoop to their level. Is that how we want to put it? Or rise to the occasion? Does one want to frame that so that it takes on more of an appropriate characteristic and less of an antagonistic one? So, but that's the problem when you have ineffective leadership, that essentially you can lose that war, which is to say you lose the war of logistics. And so, yes, the people that just choose cowardice in the face of that, that's really not the right option, because that is the definition of losing. But if you've already pre-selected for imbecility or the inability to think outside the box, to the point of false target acquisition, such as persecuting your heroes, then they've got you where they want you, don't they? Looking in the wrong direction and doing the wrong things, which will counterintuitively lead to violence, not peace. Because your credibility disintegrates from within as well as from without at the same time. And so you're not really an adversary. You're just a bunch of bricks waiting to be scattered and discarded after they've played their load-bearing role in a not so well-meaning game. But returning to the optimism is something one can have when one has changed one's attitudinals that were deficient, and therefore right effort was deficient, and right view were deficient. But now they're not. And so now victory certainly is possible in every sense of the word, and it really does need to be in every sense of the word to be a true victory. If you ever find yourself saying, "I can't believe this," you can respond with, "Or can I?" And if you can't, why not? Because reality is showing you different facets of itself that might not have been what you expected them to be, such as the childish idea that one would just have a pleasant life where all one's expectations are met to the expectations that one has. But that is not what life with variability and randomness and change has in store for many people who are planning in weeks and months and years, but they might not have as many days or hours as they think. And so they are deluded until the day they die. On the day they die, they're as deluded as they lived. And so that's also a theory of these future lives that is so compelling, because if you look at it with that lens, then you can see that there's a certain truth to it, because there's a certain directionality in being deluded versus not being deluded. Which is to say, to be the straight arrow on its way to the perfect center of the perfect target, into perpetuity. That level of Zen centeredness, fixedness, one-pointed practice. And then you can also add disc style, spinning disc style. What is right? What is wrong? Why do you see this as wrong? Why not as right? You thought it was the wrong time for something to end, but it was indeed the right time. The time it had to end. But sometimes it can be deceiving. You could think it's over, and then it could come back from someplace unexpected. And that can be bad thoughts. It can be bad expectations. Are the expectations that one have that cause so much suffering a good thing or a bad thing? I expected this person to be on time, but in fact they were half hour late. If some people can get really worked up over those things, especially if they happen over and over again. So, but sometimes everything works out, and so you can't really expect bad things to happen. You don't necessarily want to prepare yourself for bad things, but in retrospect, it's just the way it had to be under the circumstances. Maybe the person really did want to be on time, but there were all these other different factors in play that made that impossible. And so it can be just as random as that. It's just that random. In fact, it is that random. Ultimately, it is. Some things take on a directionality of their own with side effects nobody was planning on, and some things can happen, and it can be, you can see that on a social level, or you can also not see that as what has happened, because why does one have to look at anything in any one particular way if one is without any attachments at all, which is recommended by the Buddha himself. He didn't say, oh, these are some good attachments here. He was just like, yeah, no attachments. Attachment itself to an external world is foolishness. And not just saying that, like really accepting that principle on a fundamental level, like so it gets to become on the subconscious level. Like, here's this chair and now it's gone. So it can happen, but that's just how things work. But if that was my chair, if something special to me, you see the suffering that could happen if I made that self-insertion into this other thing, and then adding on top of that certain expectations. And depending on how divergent the reality is from those expectations, the more difficult it can be to come to terms with that, because human beings really only have a certain spectrum in which they think in, and they don't want to be thinking in terms of bad times, bad vibes, bad projections. So, but it does depend on where you're looking and what you're thinking. Where are your attitudinals at the moment that you are interacting with the subject matter? Like, just imagine a block of clay and you're pushing it and pulling it with your hands, and you have a certain autonomy into shaping something that is perhaps useful or pleasant, or you can also just go at it as unskillfully as can be, and the results are not going to be all that other than what you're doing, which might also be not forming something at that time, but just playfully experimenting for the sake of it, not having an object or a schedule or a clock or a routine, because those things can be dispensed with and they can also be reestablished in ways that are helpful, which might also be more quiet and gives you a lot of space and time to recharge, and that you're not running yourself ragged all the time, that you can take a couple of days off if you need to, and that's okay, because you do. If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. Now that's not to say everyone should be overly sensitive. If you can increase your resiliency and you can increase your dynamic qualities, that's great. That's part of the healing process. That should be expected. But everyone needs to know for themselves where they are in their healing practice. And if they're still in the recovery phase, then that's where they need to remain until they can make it to the next stages. But, what are the next stages? That's a certain directionality should be there, but it doesn't need to be there all at once. People can take some time to sort some things out. And so that's sort of a compassionate reorientation process, especially if you've been in situations that have been traumatic. And I think people being in jobs where they might have been mistreated or done other things like that those can have a very traumatic impact on people. And so thinking of it in terms of that as well might be helpful in understanding a lot of people that might, be experiencing difficulties based on those types of experiences. Now, I think a lot of people, of course, all people have a lot to offer, so it's better, especially when older people are around, because they usually, if they lived skillfully, they have a lot to contribute to civil society. It's a good sign when old people are doing well. It's a good sign for everyone, but if they're not, then certainly it makes sense to look into that if you're heading that way. Which is to say that helps social cohesion. It's not just a charity. But yeah, certainly social cohesion is something that's more important than the economy. Economy, you have to have the one first and then the other second. It's just the way it is. So that's not to say that it's not impossible to get along with people, but within limits. Right. To not do that would be a statistic. And we know the effects of sadism is just a harm. So the sooner that that whole attitudinal situation is cured, the better for everyone. And this is like a no fight, no blame platform. So no fingers are pointed at anyone. It's just about evolving past this into a new civility that doesn't involve um, these types of malicious uh, activities. Because whether or not you're on board with this or not, it's going to have bad consequences in unforeseen ways if it's not put back in the box. And that's just something everyone should consider on the basis of humanity, right? Humanitarian principles. Because essentially that is where I'm resting my case. Another thing I've noticed about the current state of psychology. Remember, secularists only have psychology. That's a very scary thought. But there's also this desire to know everything, including other people. But essentially, sometimes we just get caught based on randomness, uncertainty, and chance in the clutches of a relationship that we might not have expected. And so perhaps the results were less than what we thought. This is also, there's certain types of personalities that really want to do the right things. There's leaning more towards the, let's say, thorough way of thinking style versus the roundabout way of thinking and acting. Like people talking, doing small talk, small office politics people versus truth tellers and people and butt kickers, people that state things as they are and might set out higher goals and want to get something done, but the other people just want to cash a paycheck with as little aggravation as possible. So the two types of people, they might be in the same room, but they don't necessarily get along for those reasons that I just outlined. You just have two different types of people, so oil and water type of people. Now, of course, if there's more mutual respect between the two groups, see, if you're more of a butt kicker, it's probably better not to be that around people that aren't like that. So, see, that's how the other side has an advantage over you because they're more feline. They're gauging you and how well you're gauging them. They're not looking at what you want done and when you want it done. You see, because then you would be overlooking them, which is the more important thing than whatever thing you're dealing with. At least that's the way they see it. And maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Maybe they're just going to be that way. Maybe you could see it as a opportunity to increase your skills in banter and not take things seriously if you're dealing with someone like that. But then again, maybe not. I can understand it could get annoying, especially if it's a repetitive thing and you have a limited amount of time, but still, if that's the way they are, then you might not want to go that way if you're not willing to be skillful, at least on some level. At least you can temper your butt kicking down a notch or two, just realizing that it's them. So you give them a little extra something because that's what they require. If you don't do that, then they're not going to really be working on an optimal level because then there might be some type of personality conflict that need not be there. Now, this is not to say that you can win them all. You certainly can't, but at least you're not the one that is just coming at people the wrong way without realizing it. Because that's a pretty unskillful position to be in. You show up, you're the perfect robot, you punch out the answer or what you expect to be the right answer, and you're surprised that it's not received in the way you expected it would. Because sometimes the truth is just one aspect of a totality of things in play, such as people's moods and people's attitudinals and perspectives, be they subnormal or supernormal, and sometimes tending towards the subnormal. But when you're in the swamp, it's best to have some gaiters on, right? Those ones with the suspenders, that's rubberized walking boots that come up to like the stomach above the belly button. So that even if you slosh around and the water sloshes up, it doesn't get into the suit. Which is okay. You can be in swamps if you're well attired, if you can pull it on and pull it off. Then it is nice to have one of those conveniences, is it not? But again, that might not be the right metaphor, because it's not always like going into a swamp with these people. It's an opportunity to keep things on the surface just for a little bit. Because maybe you're going too deep, too fast, too hard, too often, which can be tedious. Nobody wants to be pitched on the mound and just have fastballs thrown at them 10 times in a row, when it's supposed to be a friendly game. That's a way of seeing it as well. And coming back to hard people, yeah, I get it. We all want to get things done and we want to be the most efficient as we can be, but that's probably not the right way of seeing it either. Just because you can see things that way doesn't mean it's the best way of seeing things. Forgetting the human factor is really, some people would say, is forgetting everything. See, a lot of us can get really caught up in our heads in the math, beyond the stars, far away, in a galaxy far, far away. But it's really not wise to do that, even if it appears to be wise to do that, or it appears to be super normal to do that. But it really isn't. It's not really the middle path. If it's not the right company, if it's not the right people for the right conversation on the right day, in that particular way, under those particular circumstances, there we are, back to change and randomness and uncertainty again. If you had that conversation yesterday, it would have been a smashing success. But one day later, due to events beyond your control, it fell on not just deaf ears, it fell on irate ears. See, that could be, again, filmmakers, that scene right there, that principle put into a scene with really good acting and convincing environmentals, dramatic lighting. That would be quite a thing. That would be quite a piece of cinema. But yeah, our lives are like that oftentimes. But we often use the high and the low points as our guides or indicators, or the things we return to, when in fact we shouldn't be doing that at all. We should not be having, let's say, overly focused problem solving placed in retrospect, which is sort of the psychological practice for secularists at this time. From the standpoint of Buddhism, that is considered an unskillful practice, because you might be getting knowledge, but are you really getting closure that way? For the Buddhists, the closure is the most important thing, not just the bookishness. It's the same thing with the Bible, same critique. Too much bookishness as far as texts go, but not enough practice. So, in other words, by reverse engineering all of these things that did have perhaps some negative effect on us, we're inadvertently engaging with it again and making it potentially anchored more in our personalities, which if we had just let it go, right, dukkha dukkha nirodha, then we would have been much more skillful. Right? It's okay to make mistakes. We cannot go through this life without making mistakes. It's okay. And it can take on comically tragical proportions in some cases, but the sooner you move on, the sooner you gain closure, the sooner you laugh it off, the better for you and everyone else. So that's not to say it's to diminish whatever pains one may have received, which the stories, you think your story is bad? Believe me, it's not even half as bad as the other stories out there. You think you were betrayed? You just go 3 houses down and talk to them about something. If people knew all the bad things other people experienced, their hair would turn white immediately, like the next day. They would be transformed into walking ghosts. So it's not a skillful practice, really, to get into that. Let's take this and dissect it over and over again. It's really focusing on let's drop this now by any means necessary. How to distract myself away from this. I realize it is the subconscious working. I realize that suppressing the knowledge or awareness of these subconscious processes is not wise. But over-focusing on it, reliving it, retelling it, is not necessarily helpful. And even if you can put it in some parameters that make it easier to understand, it's really more about understanding that how other people can think differently about the same things as you, which we are a narrative or a narrator-focused, egoic being in many ways. That does not mean that it is super normal. That's normal. But the super normal way is to reduce the ego to zero. It's not you, it's not yours. It's not me, it's not mine. And you have to see some of your own delusionality in the process. You were naive. You made the mistakes. In retrospect, you see it, but that's not a reason to beat yourself up about it more, which is what a lot of people end up doing. Even if me saying that, everyone would agree with me that's a dumb thing to do. They do it anyway. That's another reason why knowledge is power is sometimes misleading, because you think you know something, but then again, you're still engaging in these unwholesome practices because you can't stop. You've been conditioned into a bad habit, essentially, an unwholesome practice. So breaking that conditionality would mean to question the psychotherapeutic process on a fundamental level, so that one can gain distance from it in a depersonalized way, which is, you see, the process of depersonifying random chance occurrences, essentially forms and conditions. And so you can take the rake and rake over your sand in a Zen way. Despite what happens in the meantime, that the little pyramids are exposed to the post-structural conditions of the instrument used in a process of reshaping. As the war in Ukraine drags on, and you watch how the left deals with it. See, the left wants to think of itself or present itself as being on the right side of history or being humanitarians or being for the little guy against the big guy. But that's just a pretense. That's sort of, you could think of it as just a propagandistic activity. They want to look like the good person, but they're not the good person. They're not on the right side. Like, they want to look like they're on the side of the laborer, the labor movement. But actually, they weren't on the side of the labor movement. They were a self serving, radical class of people willing to do anything and using that as an escalator to power and positions that in any functioning society would have excluded them for a numerous right reasons. One of the first being their proclivity to live in an alternative reality where they can do no wrong and everyone else is there to serve as their supply or disappear, essentially. So, yeah, it turns out that there were like promises of support, then didn't end up happening. So, but of course, that's not their fault. It's somebody else's fault, but not theirs, because they're big into that game as well. Like all the crappy political games that we thought were normal really aren't, but they like to think that that's the only way politics are done. So again, tactically, they're there in front of the camera. Strategically, there's nothing behind what they do. In fact, a lot of the things they point to as achievements are just total historical disasters. Their sociology is a historical disaster. Their social effects are historical disasters, but they like to point to them and still point to them as like some type of achievements. Like the revolutionaries in Cuba, they are still in this day, this we're still talking 2024, they probably still have their little parades, right? Where they all dress up and celebrate what a great thing it was that they took over power. And on those days, everything has to be sanitized. Like, you cannot protest on that day. Although you really can't protest any other day either, but especially not on their big fake alternative reality days. They have these crappy things they celebrate, their ideological conformancy tests. And you better celebrate them. And if you don't, again, you're a bad person. So, despite the realities of the situation, it has to be an act of will to conform to their narrative because they say so. And this is, again, so sort of in the context of malignant narcissism, but also in the context of sadism. Like they get enjoyment by forcing people to do things that essentially are humiliating because there they are celebrating a government that doesn't work for them in any key area. Not culture, not the economy, not the legal system. But there they are out there celebrating them because they said so. So that I would say that's sadistic supply. That's there's some perverse aspect to them. Maybe it's just because they've been bent into pretzels themselves that they really get off on doing that, like going overboard on those types of things. Normal person wouldn't do that. Normal governments wouldn't do that. like celebrate the big mistakes in history that um, essentially their cult, political cult, has deemed to be a good thing, but really wasn't in historical terms. But see, then again, we come back to the battle of the bourgeois because, yeah, you're a historian that might see it that way. Well, you get canceled. Your book pulled from the shelf. It never existed in the first place. That's how their management technique takes care of inconvenient alternative realities to their own. So the slow boiled, um, half cooked left of the West has just continues on in its captured ideological boilerplate. And they're not going to be questioning their lives at this late stage. They're just going to continue with the myth making, and the myth um, projecting, myth producing side of their activities. And the main thing, which is personal enrichment, personal aggrandizement, and also conformity, and being leveraged by their base, their leveraged base, their hostile, alien, leveraged base. They're just gonna keep devouring and misdirecting those resources until the wheels fall off. So you could see it. There's different times, different places, it's different people, but it's just they organized it in such a um, holistic, um, full spectrum way that it's been at least this version of it has been so absolutely catastrophically horrible for the entire civilized world. But we're talking about ambitious people that wanted to expand their franchise by any means necessary. So, which is, by the way, one of the slogans they use. They think that makes them strong. It's like a strong bacteria, any means necessary, attacking a healthy body. Is the way you need to see that. So, and they went into, yeah, capitalism, left capitalism, uh, which essentially were just also administrative positions that they weaseled their way into. And then what did they start doing? Well, start funding horrible projects. Um, big component of revenge. There was less revenge, I think, tolerated in the Eastern models. It was just pure conformity, but in the West, there's a revenge component to the leftism. So getting into capitalism as a crappy leftist, like the Greens do, the little Russian stooges, little green men and women of the Green Party. They go in, become a capitalist, and then they invest in, yeah, basically scams that lead to increased energy prices and housing prices. And so they become like the worst of whatever capitalism used to allow. They become the worser version of that with even less care for the future because of their inexhaustible supply of revenge that they want to take out on what they perceive to be class politics. That again, no normal person is seeing things that way, but they aren't normal, and they don't want to be normal, and they don't like the normal, but they're looking at it from a subnormal perspective, not a supernormal perspective. They're also supernormally active in taking things over, so, and then supernormally interested in taking out revenge. So I guess we can't really call that supernormal, can we? We could just say that, sort of call that ambitious. The person that wants all the money in the bank and then commits crimes to get it isn't really um, a good person, are they? Although that might be a bad example. Let's say there's a bakery with wonderful pastries that were made with a lot of effort by the people who get up early in the morning and put in a lot of time to make those things. And it takes a lot of talent too, a lot of dedication, more dedication than they're probably getting paid. Well, they went in and stole everything. And when you showed up to pay for yours, you didn't get one. Because they are them. They did it because they could do it, and that's how smart they are, or think they are. So they do create, let's say, bad vibes amongst people, but because their PR just keeps spinning away, there's that disconnect between the polling numbers and their self-esteem, certainly. But yeah, the rotted out illiberal democracies, that's just par for the course, that there's an approval rating of, 10%, 5, 10, 15%. Maybe they do some type of stunt like start a war and drum up public support. It might go to, 30%. Who knows? But we do know they do like to fudge those numbers when they don't reflect what the higher ups want them to reflect. So there we see again alternative reality. How's the economy doing? Oh, give me 5 days to cook the numbers, and I'll let you know how well it's doing. That's their accounting too. So yeah, really unfortunate. Really, really, really unfortunate if you have people like that fronting as your political establishment. It's really the worst thing you could ever have. But again, today they're trying to get rid of labels. What are they today? They're that with whatever characteristics they can get away with, because they don't want to be called that. They just want to be called something else, because it's a permanent continuous revolution, isn't it? The wig gets revolved around 360 degrees and then put back on the cap. And then again and again, because that's the business they're in. So effects on the ground, social conditions, social cohesion, yeah, trust, public trust plummets. Good things happening plummets. Real wages plummet. Satis- life satisfaction plummets. But yeah, the self-congratulatory presentations, they don't plummet. They might flatline, or they might even go up. It just depends on how much craziness they want to engage in at that time. But you can be assured that no matter what they say, things aren't going to be getting any better if they're the dominant, prevailing ideological component in your political system. So taking them seriously, what they think seriously, how they operate seriously, is a serious matter, and a serious person doesn't take them at face value. For Westerners in this time, I ask you to forgive yourselves for being deceived. Essentially, a war was declared on you, while at the same time they declared peace on you. There was going to be a new peace, is what they said. But essentially, they decided to conduct war via civilian means. While not saying that they were conducting war, they were just changing the culture, just this little thing. In universities, you have these, crazy, hip, progressive professors that come up with all these wild ideas. So that's not your thing, is it, Grandpa? So just leave us alone. Let us do our thing. And they got to young, impressionable people and taught them the exact opposite of what they should have learned. taught women to hate men, right? Hate themselves, hate their culture. And men too, as much as they could do that. Maybe they only got 60% there, 30% there. Then they added the conformity to their tyrannical, sadistic culture and produced a bunch of masochists that were captured in a culture that they didn't think had left them, but actually it already did. It's just the streets were the same, right? Place names were the same, people were talking the same language, but they were talking a bunch of crazy, destructive nonsense. And with all of the passion of somebody who really believed in their cause, with all of their revolutionary zeal. How about this? Some of them got charged for that by shooting too many people in places where they could get away with it, then ended up getting shot themselves. So where that's coming from is probably not a good place, that type of zeal, do you think? But yeah, sadists have a certain zeal. Narcissists have a certain zeal. A lot of schemers have a certain zeal. And people who don't give a damn have a certain zeal for certain things, just not for you, or anything that matters to you, or anything that should matter. They don't care. Look at that, just a big zero. It's very prevalent amongst certain people in certain professions where they're required to lie all the time, but who would do that except a really bad person? But they got the job? What does that mean? So yeah, politics works when there's a large amount of people keeping a close eye on who gets in and who doesn't. And if you let a whole bunch of people come in that were maybe coached or prodded or propped by terrible geopolitical actors that had nothing but larceny, robbery, and destruction in mind, or maybe business, they want to focus on the nice parts of their operation. Let me focus on the business part, not the other parts. Well, that's great for them living in their little bubbles, isn't it? But not so great for everyone else that they sold down the river. And they did. They sold the whole project, not just the people. They didn't know you personally. They just sold the whole concept down the river of a nation state run by upstanding people working in their own best interest without an artificial class of pseudo-revolutionaries that just take these old ideas and repackage them and re-instrumentalize them against new people that are innocent and want nothing other than to be free of them. But they don't want that. That's the point. You're in their system. That's the way they see it. And they would rather be calling the shots than letting somebody call the shots on them, because of course they don't trust anybody to do that. Because they're not the type of person to trust people, because they know why you wouldn't want to trust people, because they're on that side of the spectrum. But of course, presenting themselves to be paragons of society, then sort of part and parcel of the flim-flammery business that they're in. So all that flim-flammery does add up. You don't do this to see. You even have experts. How about this? They'll pay experts to give them a report what they should do, and then they don't do it. Right? They blame other people. They just didn't have enough. There was this faction that wanted this much baloney, and so they got it just like every time, because they're the baloney people. They're not the, promise the baloney, don't deliver the baloney people. So all the baloney goes to them, and the experts, their whole list, I mean, maybe 40%. They'll throw 40% to something if they have it left over, but of course there should be 110% behind these things. But there's a lot of shoulder shrugging, a lot of motions, a lot of fingers pointing in different directions, a lot of inferences, a lot of shuffling, a lot of, okay, what's this week? We're getting bored with this story. What's the new thing? oh, some lady got stuck on her balcony trying to save her cat. Somebody took a picture of it. Let's run with that. I'm feeling a bit down this week due to all the other more ominous things. That's essentially your infotainment bubbles that most of these people live in. And then, of course, like half of their information is factually wrong. So, but they know things, they think. They're really strong about their opinions. Okay, what? I don't think a relationship's going to work out there long term unless you don't talk about anything. But that's probably preferable because they're primed and ready to go to explode over basic truths that shouldn't really disturb anyone. And look, that's one of their things they're pushing. It's just a psychological attack vector. So let's take some type of very divisive thing and make it the public thing and just make it an ongoing thing without any resolution or regulations against it. Or anything other better going on. That some better thing is probably going on than their nonsense. And so it's just a never-ending negativity, source of negativity and stupidity. But again, who would be doing that? Well, cultural people that hate the culture that they're actually destroying. They're just fifth column, that's right. They have the position, they're wearing a different uniform. They have different pajamas on under their clothes. So for them, again, they get the joy of the troll doing their worst and maintaining cover, essentially. So they think that does feed into their narcissism because they feel like they're top of the world. They're doing their best while doing their worst. So that's a certain type of impunity that a lot of people wouldn't expect, and yet that's what they use. Because essentially they didn't turn over another leaf. They weren't convinced that the West had all the answers. They were still convinced that they had all the answers. And that the West was just filled with a bunch of idiots that they could take out with money. How about that? Throw some coins at the problem. That was essentially their solution. Combined with a couple of other things. Again, priming a lot of idiots, a lot of corn-fed idiots. That they really did have a real grip on history. It just turned out to be completely fake. So yeah, those damages, they're real. They're tremendous. They're unquantifiable. I mean, bad on a scale never before seen, witnessed in the modern world. And so people think, well, it'll plateau. Well, why? Why would it plateau? Like, where do you think it's going to plateau? Because, again, there's lots of nice examples out there. Haiti, is that a plateau? Is that a desirable outcome? Oh no, we won't let it get that far. Really? Well, is that what they said until the brakes fell off? Everybody thinks they've got it, but there are some people that will take proactive measures to take the right maintenance steps, replace somewhat worn out components in advance just because they don't want to have the possibility, the heightened possibility of being engaged in some type of catastrophic incident or another, or just even being inconvenienced. And so they take preemptive measures to operate in a more professional manner, which is what one should do. But if you just have your run-of-the-mill, greedy, deluded person, schemerous person, within the realm of their proclivities, which are subnormal, essentially, in ethical terms, as terms they don't think exist, oddly enough, so that they consistently over time do not make the right decisions. And that adds up. It has a cumulative effect. And it's weird, like in a factory, you'll have all hands not doing preventative maintenance. So what department will get blow up first? Oh, this could be a great movie, guys. Come on, this would be amazing. Call it like The Broken Factory. And it's just possible that these guys in this part of the factory, that their machine broke down because it was the most complicated of them all. But because they aren't doing what they're supposed to do, they're the bad guys, and they don't care about the logic of their arguments. They're the people who are always screwing up. And so, who wants to work there? Whereas, the people that have the old fax machines and printers and stuff, they can still produce documents because their printers haven't blown up yet, but they also haven't really done anything to maintain that. It's just the robustness of the product design. I mean, some of those printers are absolute beasts. I know some people out here know what I'm talking about. So so you could show the different departments like that. But I mean, again, they're just keeping on a wing and a prayer. I mean, next month or next week, one of those instruments could break, and then everyone will come screaming down upon them as the bad guys. But they don't know how to fix it, or the part person. Some guy, who whatever fudged something or other, has a know-nothing job. He's a part of the pointer class. Murdered some guy, some engineer's wife, and then he stopped working there. And so since then, it's just been this looming cloud of things going wrong. But of course, nobody can leave. You're sort of stuck in a one-pony town. It's maybe like a village factory. Oof, man, I could turn this into a really great piece of cinema. Just what I would like, how I would show the plants blowing in the wind at different times to convey a certain metaphor. And sort of more the bleak house, like Dickens, but way darker, like more Poe. But some Dickens and Poe and Shakespeare, sort of a combination of those three. But not just always down all the time. There would have to be some humor. There would have to be some humor somehow. I don't like totally down films. I think that's not the point. Or perhaps the book, The Village Factory, would be a better product. But see, how long would it take to write a book like that? Let's just say 3 years. Now, some people, well, there's different ways of looking at things, right? If you took the 3-year approach, then it's no pressure, and it would be just one of these things you devote some time of the day to. A certain focused revelry, a daydream that reveals itself day by day in its complexities. Or perhaps its simplicities. If you can simplify things and work with things, and then not overly complicate things. And if you can put things like guilt behind you, a sense of shame, a sense of remorse, any sense of regret, missing out, right? We're often not aware that we might have that lingering somewhere. Am I missing out, or I feel like I'm missing out, or if I only had this, I wouldn't have missed out. But is that really true? What if I actually got the things that I wanted at one time? Have you ever thought like that? You should think like that. If you never thought like that, think like that. What if, now this could be another play or story. What if you got everything you ever wanted? Oh, the idea itself it sounds convincing. It sounds pretty convincing, doesn't it? But a lot of times we want things that it would be better that we never get. Many times, many times. Many more times than we know. Because why? Because we're ignorant. We think it would have been like this, but actually it would have been totally different. And why is that? Because we're ignorant. We don't know. We didn't know it was going to end up this way. We thought it was going to end up that way. So this is why it's always good to come back to the here now and take a deep breath. Because if you're still kicking, if you still have your wits about you, you still have your sanity, you still have a little bit of that thing called cheerfulness and gratitude, maybe even a little joy from time to time. How's the sun shining right now? Or isn't it nice that the sun isn't shining? You can take it either way. If you were thinking that you might be missing the sun, then think of like the day where you were just stuck in the sun and burning away, and how awful that was, and how nice it is by comparison not to be under such a sun. And if you've been in dark places like caves or basements or other places, and then the sun is shining and it's just lighting up the room or lighting up the world, lighting up the fields, the forest, the jungle. Then experience that moment detached from past or future. And experience that reality deeply. Because it is your own, it is your experienced reality. It's not a gimmick. It's not a promise. It's experienced reality in the here now. One detached from both past and future. And that we can generate that wholesomeness, goodness, and freedom within ourselves, no matter what, no matter where, so long as we have the skill to do so. The skill. It's not about power. It's not about strength. Although those things certainly come into play, but skill is the thing. It's the threading of the needle that is required, not the clenched fist. Although it is understandable if you come into meditative prayer as a clenched fist, it's going to take time to release, disengage, disconnect whatever it is that's amping you up. And reflect, what is it, where is it coming from, what could it be, and okay, let me let that go, because I'm doing this right now, and this right now requires me to do that. It's not personal. It's just this thing right now because that's this practice right here. You see that type of delegation? It's okay, look, my pants are splattered with something. I just walked in off the street. So I'm going to take those off and put them aside for a moment. And the shoes, I'm leaving those also in front of the door so I don't track the mud in. Then I might even go, if there's facilities, I will wash my hands and my face, but I will do so more mindfully than normal, as also a beginning to a spiritual practice, which involves and engages and activates the purification process, that it is a component of it, an accepted ritual, a good outcome, and a good way, a good process. Although being purified is not something that one is all the time, but one can come back to the process of purification and re-purify. Have you ever washed your hands once and then you walked around and then you looked at your hand and noticed it wasn't enough? So I'm going to have to go back, and you go back and you wash your hands a second time. And this time you might focus on whatever spots you're dealing with. Were you changing the oil? Well, you might be dealing with oil stains. A little bit more difficult. There's also different techniques you can use. Like mechanics know how to do it way more skillfully than you do. But if you're not dealing with a lot of oil, then that might not be the purification process that's appropriate for your life, which it most likely isn't. But maybe you have something else that requires the same type of dedication and speculation and adaptation of skill so that you can skillfully purify what it is you're dealing with in terms of unwholesomeness at the time. Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it a mania? Is it aversion and desire? Is it this, and it's all the same? So you got to unpack these things sometimes. And you do need to take the time, and you do need to have the neutrality to do so. So don't try to jam your practice up if you're not ready to look at things neutrally. The first thing is to reach a state of neutrality. Once that is reached, then you can proceed slowly with a playful curiosity. Go through things and let things go, one by one, untangling the knot and not being rushed in the practice, because by doing that you really are freeing yourself. You know that. You can sense that. It is that. It's not that you're unnecessarily touching things you should leave alone. It's just you sort of have to touch them sometimes to understand how they're being held together so you can detach the knots that hold them together. And it might be you can't get the two knots done, but the one knot is looser, and that's the one you loosen, and then the string falls apart. The causality of the thought is detached. Now, I've listened to some psychologists that say that detachment is a part of a freeze response. And I will agree with that, but I think it's something that can be done skillfully enough so that they can finally detach from the thing that's keeping them in stressful states of mind. Because it's really not the things themselves that are causing these heightened stressor states, but rather they're thinking about those things that are causing those stressor states, if that makes any sense. It's a layer of abstraction higher. So, but by bringing people to that level, then they can detach, and then it will bring down their stored trauma, level of trauma. It will reduce that. Because it's often people that have a heightened amount of stored complex traumas that are the ones that are the quickest to flip into a free state, even if the conditions aren't really there for that, to justify that happening. So their fuses are real short, in other words. But if you are able to detach the subconscious processes that are running, then you'll bring down that baseline, and so you will have that much more resilience going forward. Although it does require a detachment from the thing instead of a continuous clinical analysis or identity-oriented kind of directionality that a lot of worldlings then take, when in fact detachment in itself, it's a natural reaction, it's just not skillfully done. So general detachment is not the thing, which is what they do. It's skillful detachment instead. But detachment itself is a survival mechanism. So it's like, you could say a scalpel can help you survive if you need to perform surgeries. But using the scalpel skillfully is the key. But the scalpel is detachment. It will detach one thing from another quite easily. So this destroyed tissue, I'm going to cut that out so that it can heal more properly. You understand the surgical metaphor? Sometimes you do have to do that. You have to go in with detachment and remove the destroyed tissue or destroyed bits of organs or muscle. But again, if you take too much, if you use the scalpel and cut your leg off, then you're not doing it right. So too much scalpel is wrong and too little is not right effort. See, detachment is a good thing when you're talking about bad things or things that are subconsciously stressing you. It could also be a social frame, some type of social framing, some type of mental construct, something like that. And we know that they've been used with just unbelievable toxicity in recent times on multiple occasions for multiple things. So it's understandable that people could have damage based on what are essentially very damaging things. See, people throw this word toxic around too much, but toxicity, in the sense that I use the word, means poisonous. Now, you can have toxic things in the universe. As long as you're not interacting with them, they're basically inert. But if you are interacting with them, you're essentially poisoning yourself. You're poisoning your mood. And they're a form of environmental variable that need not be there, but are there for warlike reasons. I think that's a just easy conclusion to make at this point. If something has bad effects, then who are they good for? Well, they're good for enemies. They're not good for the people that they're having the bad effect on. So I think that does help clear things up. I mean, a lot of people need that clarity before they will take appropriate measures, but you would think people wouldn't need that, but they sort of do need that on some level to take certain things as seriously as they should, because certain things are definitely more serious than others. And for example, having your government work against you is one of those traumatic things that can be experienced by people that live under conditions like that. But not just that in its that one word is sort of hard to define. It could just be some aspect of it or a cultural aspect of it. There's a lot of different things that can and are used at this time to make all that bad magic happen. It's just, again, the people tasked to responsibly shutting things like that down. They got other priorities than the public welfare, as their personality profiles do reveal. So I wouldn't say that's a general indictment. I think it can happen at different times in different places for different reasons. And people can be benefited from positive changes, which maybe right next week we're going to have a new era of freedom and prosperity. It's possible. I would just say under these conditions, highly unlikely. But maybe not. Like maybe that's too pessimistic. Maybe it's likely. Maybe somebody changed just one thing today that will lead to a much better world instead of a much worse one. Maybe it's some innovation somewhere that we didn't expect. And maybe people themselves, if they start this practice, will look into themselves individually and change themselves accordingly using purification processes and prayerful meditation. Blame, 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 blame. Think of blame as a sign. Blame is like spitting bullets, but you're shooting the gun, right? You're loading the bullets. So look at the bullets you're shooting. Those are the things that you need to disable. So just, if you have like a magazine, you can just use your thumb and click, click, click. And you might even want to do that just to visualize how you're not blaming others. Because you're not really shooting the bullet to them, you're shooting them at yourself. Because you're the one that's generating that aggravation. It's just the illusion that it's something out there, it's that thing that you're blaming that's causing that, but no. It's you shooting the gun at something, but it's that something that you're using, if that makes any sense, to get you to shoot the gun. But you can also not do that. But it might happen without you realizing it. But you can catch yourself when you find yourself blaming something out there. Because that's the sign that you need to stop doing that, and you need to look into how did those bullets get into the magazine anyway? Like, are you reloading these thoughts, these desires, these aversions? Because if you're loading it, that's where you should not do that. But you might have to go down to that level to unpack that, which means you have to click out all the bullets and look at it and then finally realize what you did and how those things got there. And isn't it funny that those things are still bothering you on some level, but it can happen. The human animal. How about this? They say elephants, they remember everything. They got a great memory. Like years later, they'll remember someone. If they did them a favor or something, they don't forget. Like decades later, they have a different concept of time. So you can also adopt different concepts of time. And our brain does. If we are still angry, like the thing happened like just yesterday, but it was 10 years ago, that's just this crazy human mind that we have. This monkey mind is crazy like that too, but it's not good, right? It's also not funny. A lot of people will laugh because they know it's true, but it's not funny, and it's really something that should be left behind, and can be left behind, but it does take right effort. It takes right view and right effort, and both of them are tricky. But right effort, it's repetitive. So it comes back, you slice it. Comes back, you slice it again. Oh, here it comes again. And then it becomes a game. And your sword, it's always working. It's always sharp. So it's coming high. There it is. Comes low. Comes straight. You can dodge to the left, right? And then all of a sudden it's playful. Practice. Playful sword style. This is not let me destroy 1,000 enemies. It's just, here's this little agitation here, and this little agitation there. And today's practice is real easy and real fun and real good. And I'm not in the middle of a hurricane. Because that can happen too, but then that's that moment of being in the hurricane and not just the playful light moments that we can have in between whatever it is that we feel is important enough to distract ourselves with, which may or may not be wholesome. So we can fall back into those habits. But we really should take a little bit more discernment as to what we're falling back into, and if we can maybe make that optional, like, wait a second, the Ajahn said that one should not do this, so here I am catching myself doing this, and just because he said it, I'm not going to do it. Now that is the wise student. But the wise student knows he is not wise. Later, it is up to the teacher to teach himself again and again how to be compassionate for a human animal, for the human animal, for also being an animal, also being a human, not a failure in a social context or a failed competitor in some competition, or someone done wrong by something or someone. Somehow this historical occurrences, we can get so crazy. What if I just decided tomorrow that the Titanic was an inexcusable tragedy and somebody needed to be blamed for it? And I were to make that a big historical issue. Of course you could do that, but how absurd would that be? See, that could be the other book I'm writing. So it's a parallel alternative history where that issue becomes the biggest issue. It never was an issue until it became an issue. Type of issue. So yeah, we can get into these unskillful ways of thinking. We can. If we're blaming others, that is the definition of unskillfulness. And so it's not about blaming others. It really is about living skillfully. And living skillfully means detaching from things that are annoying. And if they're artificially annoying, then yeah, detaching from the people that are responsible for making things artificially annoying is a natural process that should not be hindered by either party. Now, that's not to say that it's not something that doesn't happen, but oftentimes it's a relationship with oneself that one's really dealing with. One's own shadow, as they say. Because if you don't entertain the idea that you could possibly have something that is diametrically opposed to you, then you can't really admit that that phenomenon might be active to some extent or another within yourself. So that might be the primary struggle and not all those things out there. So these are some of the final realizations that one can have to give oneself the optionality of infinite view. Coming back to a second to what I like to call now as OCs, Overton conservatives. Because again, conservatism of today, just like the Tory party, means absolutely nothing. In fact, less than nothing. It's like you're holding on to a pretense as it gets completely redefined, repackaged into the exact opposite of what one would intuitively think it to be, thanks to a Linskiist and people claiming to be conservative because they can. I can claim to be from outer space if I really believe it. And if I can make you think it's true, then why can't I believe it too? These types of games, these sophist rhetorical games. So what are you dealing with when I see that little tip-off with the Alinskius conservative? The problem is that the conservatives think that they're engaging with the left, but the left is just a spectrum. So if they're engaging with you on some little issue, that's just a pretense. That's just the beginning. They're not really engaging in it in the same way someone who is operating in good faith would engage with you. See, that's the whole point. They don't believe, as ideologists, they don't believe that democracy is a legitimate form of government. See, because they're coming from the absolute bottom, like, see, there's normalcy, and then you have to just imagine disconnecting the emergency brakes on an elevator shaft. If you're at like 0, which would be normal, I mean, you're not even close to super normal, but you're normal, you would have to stand in this elevator and disengage the brakes and fall into like a shaft, like to the 8th floor of the building, to sort of have a grasp of how they're looking at things. Because again, these are essentially malignant narcissist, tyrannical sadist, and spineless sadist types mixed into one with some schemerism, not caring and making it all about them kind of personalities. So obviously, if an election goes against them, there was a conspiracy against them. Why is that? Well, because they project. So they're never happy with any vote that is against them. And why would people be for them? Well, they think to win an election, you just lie. You make people promises. You just sort of whiz them off like they do other people. But the other side whizzed them off more than your side, so the other side is beating you at the whizzing game. This is how they see things. Like a super normal person is like, what? How can people think like? Why would you think like? Yeah, well, subnormalcy explains all of the answers to your questions. And again, the ideology that they've been given is deep, it's thick. They got books written from this point of view. They put a lot of effort into propaganda and into psychology and into convincing people with these subnormal proclivities into these aggressive political funnels and then directing them. Who do they attack? The bourgeois, the person who's just pretending to be qualified from their point of view, but is actually more qualified, even if they don't have a university degree, even if they don't have some type of academic seniority, even if they don't have all the stamps in their little red books. Yeah, somebody just pops out of nowhere, a real expert, and puts them to shame. That person is a terrible person in their opinion. It's a whole class of people. Could be anybody. That guy wearing the glasses, this woman here. How about this? Having a better understanding on morality. Like, no, letting people speak is sort of how we do things here. What? Somebody coming from the eighth floor, was it -8 in the human department? They don't see it that way. Nothing you say is going to make them think that that's true. That somebody beat them fair and square at a debate, made them look like complete ignoramuses. How could they ever believe that to be true if they're malignant narcissists on top of being sadists and not caring and wanting everything to be about them? How are they going to change their attitudinals to fit the new narrative that they're essentially slime, good for nothing, a corrosive, debilitating force in the world? You see, they don't want to accept that. They also don't want to improve themselves. They don't want to do some fact-checking or do some hard introspective work and come out of those ways of thinking because they're stuck in those ways of thinking. Like a lot of people get stuck in ways of thinking. Now the good news is you can get stuck in good ways of thinking. That's my method. But it's not a method that they have. They also would consider that not to be realistic enough, not to be powerful enough. They might say that that's weak. The strong thing is to take something over and break it. That's strong. But not doing that, that's weak. That's how they see things. So you're not dealing with high quality people. And it's really unfortunate that there's not more high quality people, but look, let's just get back to the Pareto principle. I mean, 2080 is just going to always be in play, I hate to tell you. Now, different democracies did things differently to try to get more of the 20% engaged, such as property ownership, right? They had male-only voting. They did a couple of things to try to improve the preconditions of the people engaged in the political process. Now, of course, guess who didn't like that? Well, a bunch of people that consider themselves extra special enough and then also put upon enough by the system that that was just unacceptable for them. And so they campaigned against that. Now, uh, understandable in certain types of situations that people could think that way and then act that way, and if they're also backed up by geopolitical enemies, boosted up, turbo boosted up, given a platform, protected, having 1,000 different scribblers write explanations for why their point of view is the better point of view, and have that published in all different places, and then also censor countervailing viewpoints, and not just censoring, attacking people with forms of terrorism. Yeah, you can see how your electoral processes could corrode over time under such bad influences. So, yeah, coming back to this whole Overton conservative desire to engage in opposition like that, that is not the sensible thing to do. At this point in time, now again, in 1919, 1917, all of these questions were not decided, right? They had a platform, they had a good game, the regime they had overthrown, nobody was really happy with that either, so people were more willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, 100 years later, we know it was a complete farce and the wrong thing to do. But their ideology is so pernicious, they have such an offensive, aggressive strategy, which is super counterintuitive to good people who would think, well, if you are wrong on such fundamental issues, you should just go away. But they overlook the efficacy that these types of terroristic stratagems have. So it's sort of the efficacy of bacteria, right? Bacteria can take over things you don't want it to take over, and the result is bad. But trying to find some neo-Darwinian explanation for why bad things should take things over because they have certain advantages if they're not addressed properly, you need to think outside the box and say, well, we don't want bacteria taking over our public institutions, so we need to take the right measures to make sure that doesn't happen. And at this point in time, 100 years in, all of their methods are pretty well, I wouldn't say known, but there's enough data there to understand how they operate for people that really want to effectively shut down their type of operations. It would not be difficult to do so. But of course, that needs to be done. It's not just enough to say that, but doing that does not mean engaging them on false terms. It means engaging them on real terms, which is to say, yeah, they don't believe democracies can function. They want to mess those up. They want to turn it into tyrannical sadism. Well, guess what? We're not going that way, and we're not going to engage with people that think that way because they don't really have the values to be engaging in a democracy in the first place, whether they think so or not. Effectively, confirming their delusionality and stop being delusional in return. Saying, okay, this is a takeover, this is a ruse, and these people are actively working against civil society for their own benefit and for the benefit of the adversaries of the country. Their effects are bad. bad on the economy, bad on socio-economic, political badness, all different kinds, thanks to their political methodology, their psychosociological political methodology. So it's about determining how they operate and essentially declaring it to be a threat to the nation and illegal. And then cracking down on illegal activity, not tolerating it. Where it flares up, it gets treated like the attack, the political attack that it is. Consider it a foreign political attack. Using, again, fifth column actors. That's essentially what you're dealing with. And we do live in a time now, it's more globalized. People can understand that more. Back in 1919, less so. And that's how they got to established. That's how they got set up. That's how they got their cover story put together. That's how they're considered a part of the culture to this day. Leftism, blah, blah, blah. It's all of it, every little last bit of it that is not non-native can get thrown out. Now, this is not to say I'm throwing out the labor movement. There was a labor movement before these radicals shoehorned themselves in, before they injected themselves and all of their toxicity into the situation. There was a labor movement. I am for a authentic, legitimate labor movement. I am not for these types of political operatives that just use it as a stepping stone to oligarchic, dictatorial, and tyrannical forms of government. So certainly, let me tell you, all you workers out there, believe you me, they don't do a damn thing for you once they get power. Once their elections are covered, they're going to win every time. They don't do a damn thing for you. So all those promises and whatnot, just forget about them. Now, as far as the fake right, look, I get that too. Those are basically people in the pockets of the bankers. The bankers are a predatory class if they're not managed properly. Who's going to say that they're the other right choice? They're not. So what are we looking at? We're looking for a third way, a middle choice. And that is not on offer right now, but that is the way to go. So the banking system, the economy, all of that needs to be re-regulated, which will have a great impact on your rent, right? Living expenses. Overnight, imagine your rent is cut by 2/3 or 3/4. How's the economy looking now? What do you think? Oh no, that would break the economy. Would it? Would it break your bank account? I don't think so. But you got these economists, they're gonna come out Chicken Little style and say, no, it's impossible, and everything will go away. Yeah, go away for who? For the people putting on these TV shows since forever, telling everybody the craziest things. So, and as far as cultural rejuvenation goes, once we turn down the plantationist electricity on the grid, right? The electronic, the electro griddle. How about that? That'd be a book I could write. The electrified griddle instead of the grid. Yeah, turn down the electricity there, like by 3/4. How do you think the economy's going to be doing in then like 5 years? You think everybody's gonna blow everything up, or you think people are going to have more money or less money? You think people are going to be living better or worse? Okay. So there's just sort of stupid basic things like that can be done once these special interest groups that are fronting as political movements get out of the equation. For example, any type of financial or group that is lobbying for financial interest, overnight, guess what? With my bill, my 5 paragraph bill, that's an illegal activity. They will be arrested immediately for that. And the sentences could be, 10 years in prison for that. Just automatic, no discussion. So, like I said, I'm not playing around. I'm not Mr. Loophole like they like to play. It's going to be no loophole at all. And essentially, banks, what are they? Essentially, they just got to keep track of the numbers. Okay? We got computers that can do that more reliably. Now, of course, backups need to be done. There needs to be system redundancy. But in many cases, I would trust a computer more than I would these eggheads that have been fudging the numbers for years now. And we have to realize all that patronage that who knows what administrations have cooked up for themselves. They got whole companies doing nothing essentially, living off government contract. So all that needs to go. Like, you see how a remodeling can take place like that. But guess who's going to be against that? Oh, that's right. Those people making all that money for nothing while your taxes go up. So you need politicians that will fight for you. And you need to support and protect those politicians because they're the only things you got against these other groups that think they got everything on wrap. Bankers and brigands, right? Pretending to be on people's sides. Oh, you don't like those? Here, come to us. That's funny. I mean, not funny in a good way. That stinks. See, that is a liberal democracy. So they don't want you having a third way. They don't want you having a center position. They're going to come at you from left and right and say, this guy, he's, the worst thing that ever happened. Look at what he did with this. Look what he did with that. This is what they do. Because they don't want to talk about the systemic issues that they're free riding off of. They don't want that called into question. They won the election. Right, 24 years in a row, they're the winners. You're the losers. Because they'll go that far. If they could win every election, they would do it. A lot of them are shameless enough. Look at their careers. They've been in a 40-year life of Pogue. Haven't done a damn thing. People are dying on the streets with needles sticking out of their arm. Like 50 a day. They keep winning elections. But, again, what type of people are we talking about? These so-called politicians. They don't solve any problems, but they are out there in front of cameras getting that supply. They're like when people clap when they stand up in front of some place and have the lights turn on. But solving problems, what's that? Like, huh? Oh, I got a team that takes care of that. Who are they? Yeah, sure. I wish there was more journalism where they would roll the camera. Who these the crackpot teams of these crackpot me big babyists are, because they haven't been doing a whole lot of problem solving, have they? But their hands are tied, right? Their legs are tied. Their butts are tied. And the worst thing is, a lot of these goobers, they don't look good at all. They don't look good at all. They look problematic from the get-go. Like, if this guy, just imagine, some guy just showed up, what would you take them for if you didn't know they were a politician? That's the way you need to think. You need to get back to basics. Like democracy, it's rule of the people, so you should have somebody of the people, not just someone who pretends to be that. And you should do the work, put in. Well, this person is a hundred, whole family's 100 billionaire, hundred millionaire type family. Disqualified. Hate to tell you, that's not the person that is the right person for the job. So if the party put up a person like that, that party isn't the right party for the country either. Hate to tell you, I mean, there are just simple things like that do matter that you shouldn't overlook. But look at the shamelessness of these people that are rich and think that then they deserve to be powerful too. And yet, what did they carry with them? Well, their greed for riches carries over to greed in policy. Them teaming up with greedy people. Let's raise the rents. What's the average house price? Let's boost it to 650,000 a pop. Now, somebody thinks that's ridiculous. Well, they did it in Australia. They're doing it in Canada. These are just utterly irresponsible, warlike, financial warlike measures that are being carried out on the population by a handful of people with global connections. There's no reason in the world Canada should have tanked in its cultural policies, its economic policies, or anything else. But oh look, somebody actually put in the work to do that, and now look at the results. Now 10 years in, how many years? Canadians, write in the comments. When did the country make the wrong turn? Was it in '93? Is that the seminal moment? So guess what? Another 2 years of those people, it's not going to be. It's going to be even worse. It's getting worse. Don't tolerate them an extra year, an extra month, if you don't have to. Figure a way to get them out, and keep an eye on the new ones. And any associations with the left, no, you might as well again put them in Russian uniforms. They're faking at this point. That would have died out a long time ago if it wasn't artificially kept alive. So this is like they say conspiracy. Yeah, it's sort of like that. Because how else are you going to explain it? How else? How are they financing themselves? How are they organizing it? It's not the power of their idea. Their idea died out. They have no credibility. It's 100 years old. So what conspiracy we're talking about? It's a reality. So essentially, it's a matter of counterterrorism. It's not a matter of political engagement. So, but that will leave the real politics. So we cut 50% of today's politics just out right off the bat. Although you might even want to say 80%. 80% is noise at this point. So then you're looking at 20% left over. Then focus on that. These are the real people that know what they're dealing with, and they're not affiliated with the financial sector. So that's what you're left with, 20% civil society. And then 80% mobs, villains, and demons of greed. And this also goes over into private equity and venture capital. These people, who the hell knows who they're working for? But as far as Western civilization goes, I don't know if we can really discern whether or not, just on the basis of their crappy commercials, you think these people are billionaires and this is the crap they put out to the public. Do you think they have the right morals, or what makes them credible other than somebody gave them money and they did something with it, and now they're doing something with it that might be highly questionable, or maybe even against the best interests of your countries or or cultures or anything else. So this is another way of looking at these businesses and controlled entities. If they're producing crappy culture and they're mistreating their workers and they have a tyrannical, sadistic, or spineless, sadistic attributes to them, that's a smoking gun right there. I think with a working legal system, they could immediately get a lawsuit, like 100, depending on how big they are, like $100 million lawsuit for social sadism, socially sadistic practices. So SSP, 100 million. And then possibly because it will go into the details and be publicly available, like chronicle all of the crimes, that it's possible that it could create such a backlash from the public that the ownership will have to flee, because they're going to be called into for additional questioning. But they're probably, they might even be detained in a pretrial type of situation because the effects of these programs are so disastrous, so questionable from the standpoint of national security that they would have to probably be put into some type of pretrial observation. Which means you'd probably have to have another team of people ready to go that can manage that position, but in the national interest. So overnight, just like that, things get changed. So and then start looking into other things like who owns what and why. But I mean, it really just depends on how far you want to go. But if you've got these types of things going on, like just total social anarchy, I think you do need to take, how shall we say, significant, profound, and clear steps against stopping the problem in all of its dimensions. As far as young people trying to understand the socioeconomic, political landscape of today, what you're dealing with in the form of an academic orthodoxy or a cultural orthodoxy is essentially the people that were left over after the real people were decapitated out of the academy. And so you also have the creation of the PMC class, professional management consultants, or how do they call themselves? I mean, it's cool because it has a dual use, military, civilian fusion. Essentially, leftist minders. And that's where we start getting into the leftist psychology, because if we look into the gutter that they're coming from, you're going to find the clinical pathology known as tyrannical sadism and spineless sadism, and also malignant narcissism, along with not caring and along with sociopathy or schemerism. So that goes to explaining, once you know that, like you know that cluster personality that you're dealing with, the people that didn't give a damn that they were replacing better people with themselves for monetary and social status points. Then things like the response to C-19 can be understood as a cultural phenomenon or an expression of sadistic, tyrannical sadism. Because if you look at things like the economy tanking and everything else, that's just the price that sadists are willing to pay in order to gratify their sadism. You see, sadists get off on hurting other people, And you can see this when they cancel people, they really feel good about themselves. They like attacking people, they like hurting people. That's what sadism is. It's very strange. There are people, see, and people that aren't sadists, they can't imagine that people think that way. But we're dealing with people that have self-selected, have self-organized on the basis of that principle. And tyrannical sadists like determining the conditions of your social engagement. And they like it when it's sadistic. That means it's humiliating, it's punishing, it's austerity. And this is the other thing. See, when we come to austerity, we have to realize like the Tory party was a cored out entity people thought was the right, that they were getting away from the leftists, but actually they were the most insane, most aggressive type of leftist, the most schemerous type of leftists that were misrepresenting themselves. Yeah, sure, whatever, I'm the new right, right? Why am I the new right? Because I'm the new thing. I'm taking your spot. I'm winning the election that everyone wants us to lose by pretending to be the opposition and then doing the exact opposite of what I promised to do, such as stopping the boats. Well, that would be stopping sadistic practices, wouldn't it? That it's hurting a lot more people, hurting the people that they're bringing in. I mean, these people are dying by the thousands. Like, they're just washing up on the beaches. So you think you're doing them a favor by letting them be exploited by human traffickers? You're wrong. Then they show up, right? A lot of these people were lied to, like that they're going to get all these different amenities, and it's a total lie. Well, who laughs? Like a belly laugh at that? Well, it's the sadistic, tyrannical sadists. They are whizzing themselves when that happens. Like all those tears, they love it. Then the sadism goes further. They'll ramrod these people in the neighborhoods that don't want them there for good reason. Like, who the hell would want that? Well, that's more sadism that can be spread around, more just random attacks, muggings, people starving to death and being driven to criminality. You name it. Well, who gets off on that? Sadists do. Authoritarian leftists do. That's what is behind it, because of course it has a rationale. It's just an irrational rationale. And the price, again, economy tanks, social cohesion tanks, optimism tanks, prosperity tanks, but that wasn't their priorities. If they said they were for those things, it was just to seem to be more liked by normal people that they don't really like, which is why they attacked their real representatives and substituted them out with themselves. So they're in that state of resentment, right? In that state of being offended by microaggressions every day. So they have to attack back in order to reclaim their sense of power. But of course, these flies swarming in their heads, these imaginary insults, it's all insanity. It's just they're projecting that out in a blame-like way. They're blaming others for what they're doing to themselves with essentially unskillful thinking and certainly unskillful acting. But then we feed into the narcissist doesn't see it that so. That's a self-rationalization. I have to hurt them because they're hurting me. And so essentially you're seeing manifestations of tyrannical sadism. Spineless sadism by tyrannical sadists and spineless sadists that have been politically organized, using all of this different type of political science, such as creating classes in order to attack them, and providing all the rationale for that. That's essentially what their political operators have done. So, to put it another way, expressions of tyrannical sadism are based on the psychology of tyrannical sadists and them becoming more influential in a social sense because they become more influential in a political way. That has been essentially compromised or degraded or flooded by interests that might have an interest in that happening to your society but not to their society, or maybe they're doing it to their society but they want it to be happening to a greater degree in your society so that they can manage your decline, as in shaping the battlefield before they go in with traditional military methods and just start blasting people left and right, so that you get the numbers up into not just the tens and hundreds of thousands of deaths by despair, but then you start getting up into the millions until there's none of you left. So young people today are dealing with a completely fake intellectual class that is captured. They moved from the academy to the politics, to the economy. Now they're in the business, because businesses are politics, right? Corporate politics, they got in onto the corporate politics. Then you also have the nepotism that's coming in out. Just think of all the C-19 businesses that they spun up for themselves just for a money grab. And now they got the money, and now they're just waiting for the next caper to pull off. If they can leverage their authority into some type of sadistic and money-making way, at least for them, then they do feel like they've won on all levels, and that's what satiates their alligator-like psychology, at least for a time. But you can imagine in those types of alligator pits, if not enough of them have gotten enough to eat, they feel, or somebody got more, that the dynamic isn't going to be really relaxed until they do. So that even satiated, like busting to the gills, just full of carrion type of alligator might get attacked by the other ones if they don't come up with a new plan to defraud the public. And so that's where you see things like the speed trap cameras going up, and then the speeding limit going down. So drop it from 30 to a 20 zone, have that camera going, and get that money going to those alligators, because otherwise they would be doing something else that's even worse than that, like setting up checkpoints and asking people for money and not letting all of them go. Some of them will pay and some of them won't, and they get to play their little power trips, because that's where their focus is. Their psychology pushes them towards that, which is not what a good person would do, would they? So we're not dealing with good people, so we're not dealing with equals, we're not dealing with people on the same wavelength. But of course, they have a lot of public relations that they want to put in between you and them. But the thing is when you start seeing the results, what they do is really what matters, not what they say. Because again, schemerism on these people is a 10. They will lie, they will steal, they will cheat. They will do whatever they think they can get away with to get something, to allow them to have the position to essentially perform or get their sadistic supply. And of course, these are not people, all the screws aren't really there. They're missing some screws, so they don't even know really what they're doing. But what they can do is rationalize anything. and they can always deflect blame from themselves to others. So whataboutism is a really good clue. Somebody engages in that consistently, they're done. They use it 1, 2, 3 times on historical matters. Yeah, you know what you're dealing with. So that's the other problem. A lot of these people are cooked, they are done, they have made their deal with the devil, and they're still amongst us. And so, how do you go about landscapes that have been shot through with these people? It's really a pressing question for people today. But as far as tyrannical sadists go, they're not really looking for the solutions you think would work best for you. They're sort of happy to keep things under control, even if the economy's tanking, and just mistreat people for their own satisfaction, essentially. So it can happen. Power and goodness don't often go together. Now, some cynical people would say power can never be good, but that's wrong. That's wrong. We can go through history. There were people that were, we can historically say, were forces for good, and others that weren't. It's just today that it's just been such a mass attack on the humanities and the arts and humanities and everything else, that it's presented as some type of cultural change, but in fact it's just been just one gigantic continuous terroristic onslaught in civilian sectors for a long period of time without being accurately diagnosed, such as what has just been done right now. That's considered, offbeat, or, well, you're not, you've got something. See, they like to try to reverse things. It criticizes of them are, of course, worse than they are, but essentially you're dealing with a lot of crazy people that aren't there for good reasons, and a system that allowed that to happen and is still taking the piss on them, like still taking them at face value, still saying, well, back in the day, if you would only believe Stalin like the 20% of what he said, it would have been a good thing. Really deluded, deranged, misguided, tricked, flipped, weak, wrong type of people. Won't admit they're wrong. Might have written books. Might have been in on it from the beginning. Might have just done it for social points. Like in every other area, they got given the sadistic fire hose, but in one area, they might not have, and so they're still going to pretend to go along with this perceived social group that knows things better, and adopted leftism. What? Adopted leftism? As a means to get ahead, as making friends and influencing people? What? Total and utter garbage. And yet, there they are, still playing that game. Who backs them up? Well, they back each other up. That's essentially it. And if you're on the outside, they'll just, appearances, window dressing. And their actions speak a lot louder than their words, don't they? But there's not so much journalism either in their types of societies, and that's the reason why. Truth doesn't fit the schemerism. So a culture that hates journalism is essentially a tyrannically sadistic culture, and it's one that is run by tyrannical sadists. So there you can have the deeds and have the people saying they're not that, and now you see them, right? Now you don't. Now you don't see them, now you do. Someone denying it, when in fact it's the definition of the thing. How tricky are they? Like, how high are their sophist points? I give their sophist points many times just a 5. Like, it's passing. And again, as time goes on, they need to bring more sophistry to the thing. Like, no, we're not connected with the thing that started the whole thing. We can't be that. We're this. We're repackaging ourselves, just like we repackaged the right. We're gonna repackage the left. We got nothing to do with that. It's about colonialism, decolonize it. That's right. They got to come up with some new blarney every once in a while. But yeah, their despotic cores as old as the day they were founded, just as old as can be, with a history that they don't tolerate in their own countries. But they're supposed to be the models for the West. Who came up with that idea again? A bunch of greedy idiots, a bunch of traitorous, imbecilic, low ethical people that also have no strategic concept of what they're dealing with in the first place. Were those the shot callers? Maybe. I mean, maybe now people can start rethinking what they thought was a good thing, what they think is good, and rethink them and how they got there, and all of those things all at the same time. Why not? See, they think that it's a terminal thing, that the West is terminal, but I don't see it that way. I mean, even if we lose 60% of idiots, then it's the 40% left that matters, doesn't it? And it might, at this point, it might only be 20% because these pathogenic actors have been so violently misguided, so misdirected, so turbocharged and organized that it's possible we could only save 20%, but maybe it's 40. Like maybe we're awfulizing a little bit too much. Maybe it's 60. Like, what day does it look this way and what day does it look that way and why? And this is not because we wanted things to be this way. This is just, you have somebody slashing your tires. This is just something that is now an environmental variable. So how many hours your optimal work week when you've got that in play is going to look a little bit different. But of course, you can take some more adaptive measures, can't you? You don't have to just say, well, this neighborhood, that would never happen, when it's happened and you had to take care of it, right? Not some big honcho with all the solutions. None of them work. You've got to figure something else out for you, don't you? And so, yeah, young people, wow, you've got way less opportunities than people had even 10 years ago, but certainly way less than 20 and 30 years ago. And 40 and 50 years ago, it's been essentially 70 years of decline. But not just gradual decline. I mean, I would say it was gradual until 30 years ago, and then it's just been going like falling off a cliff for the last 10 years. So what a time to be born into. I can only imagine. I can very much empathize with the lack of opportunity in the face of just overwhelming hatred by the worst people on the planet. Could sort of figure how that could, mess with your feelings of optimism. But look, that's just what happens. So this is what we're dealing with. They also are big into memory wars and fake history, so beware of any idols that they might have. They're probably not as wonderful people as they claim to be, because, like I said, they're rebuilding statues of Stalin at this time. So any nincompoop that was on their team doing bad things, they're going to come back with a fresh paint job on their goodness for the country. But if they really had bad effects, were they all that good? Well, they say so. But why should you say so? So watch out for that. Anybody dealing with memory wars, they're done. Stupid people don't end up in a memory war. So these are smart villains, essentially, manipulators, and total and utter haters of the truth. So if they're wrong on that, what can they be right about? Well, the answer is absolutely nothing. The people, just imagine them glowing in the dark with radiation. That's what you're dealing with. Someone that is misguided, aggressive, and hateful, essentially. And if you don't want to take my word for it, just go back to the Buddha. Yeah, people beating themselves, beating the drum about some past injury. He never recommended that. In fact, he advised against it. So you say I'm wrong, well then you're really saying he's wrong. So who's wrong? I'm willing to bet you're wrong. But will you be willing to bet that because I said that and you have an ego problem? That's your problem. But unskillfulness does manifest itself, and people involved in memory war, they're as unskillful as they come. So you got a whole big department of resentment and hate based on that. Well, this is the good news. You can pull that out and throw it away and not use it as some type of rationalization for injuring people today in the here now. Because essentially that's how it works. They get you worked up about some topic and then they misdirect you. And memory war is the biggest part of that. So beware what you're listening to. Also, there's so many fake influencers, bad influencers now. It's just, the landscape is riddled with them. Cut down who you're listening to. And the amount of things you're listening to and how wise the people are you're listening to. And reduce it to really a minimum. Like, I would say if you're listening to more than 3, you should probably stop. And those 3 you should really pick carefully. Like, some people talk about Joe Rogan and these other meatheads to get into podcasting and stuff. These guys are often wrong about things. Okay, just because they go in and they talk about a few things, and it's like amazing they haven't been canceled during the Chinese Revolution for the West, which should tell you something. But a lot of these guys don't have things thunk through, even on any significant level. It's just like open air, let's talk about BS. You're wasting your time with people like that. You know who was another one? Was the InfoWars guy, Alex Jones. Complete waste of time. This is essentially a misinformationist. So if you're on that wavelength, you're in a bad way. They created a conspiracy box, and they want people that are looking for answers to go to those idiots and get the wrong answers. And I saw the other day, infomercials looked like an old dude with a little Smurf beard in a shop. He picked a phony setting for himself. The place looked trash. But he had about 20 minutes of weird takes on world events, acting like he knew what he was talking about. So don't forget that the 60s happened. The 60s had just some of the worst human torpedoes ever produced, and they're still floating around, and they're still on that political organizing agenda level. They have a lot of opinions, and they're very wrong on all of those opinions. And so, yeah, you got young idiots and old idiots. It's probably one of the worst times that have ever happened in all of human history. And yet it seems so tepid, as if nothing's happening. So then we get to the religious front. Look, back 30 years ago, people were more religious. Today, you're dealing with complete idiots that have no concept of worldly consequences or spiritual consequences. They don't think spirituality exists. They think it's just like feel-goodism. They have no idea, no clue. Oh, and here's the thing, all these priests and other pastors, a lot of them have been infiltrated by NGOs and government agents. And they have political agendas. And you can see it if you look for it. And those people, they stink. Those people shouldn't be where they are. But they are, so what do you have left? Well, not very much. But it might be something there. You're just going to have to look harder for it. Just like with the cities where they take over and tank the entire economy. Well, there used to be jobs, but now there aren't. So what do you do? Well, I guess you got to figure things out. It's not the same as it was 5 years ago, and so it's not going to be the same in 5 years. So there's no point in getting too down on things that are broken. But on the other hand, you do have to take some type of action based on these terrible developments that nobody really wanted except for a minority of extremely hateful and toxic people. So this is just our time for now. But you can take some self-preserving measures, and you absolutely should. And now you know sort of the personality types you're dealing with. And guess what, sadists? There's nothing cool about sadists. They might think they're cool, but that's it. It's something, go into the dictionary, read some more about it. It's a really bad thing to be, and it's a bad thing to tolerate. So if it's around you, you need to get away. You need to take it more seriously. Because these people will hurt people, and they do hurt people. They have hurt people. It's just they've gotten clever about how they do it. And have been having a mass effect. So, yeah, in this realm, I hate to tell you, chance and randomness are always in play. Knowing that, use that to your advantage. It's a pleasant thing to ponder. Editorial direction. So imagine you are engaged in a literary exercise, and you might be arranging letters from different writers. And then it's about composing them, like what is the important thing now? But of course, this is only one point of view. So it can be a personal enterprise, in a way, a form of personal expression. Given the variety of the things that one might encounter, which is also of a limited nature. But what are the things that are interesting in our time that are also positive? That when we're dealing with people that don't have the deficiencies that we like to point out in the other side, why don't we turn around and look at the people that might want the best outcome for the most amount of people that matter the most? If someone has that general understanding, then that's a good person. That's someone who has what it takes to engage in political responsibility. I think that's the way to put it. It's responsibility. It's not office. And if people aren't living up to these responsibilities. In fact, if they are abusing their office, then it's just natural and logical that you would have bad outcomes. But I don't think any bad outcomes need to be terminal. It's just something to be expected. We can't expect humanity to be perfect. We can just manage what we can manage with what we have at our disposal. But we should have the right first principles that being a human being is a good thing. And that we do place a high value on high ethics. As technicians put a high value on standards, technical standards. You cannot have a piece of steel that is just wobbling all over the place. And you cannot have a political class that is not up to task or have the right principles. But of course there's people that, don't see things that way, don't want to see things that way. And there's people that are trying to do their best, and then those that might just be pretending to be doing that, but not doing that. Or not caring enough to do that, or being capable enough to do that, or competent enough to do that. It could be that too. Let's not forget that there's a good reason why that's considered to be plausible deniability, because it's plausible. Right? That's the thing. Incompetence is plausible. But good management identifies it and corrects it, doesn't it? Bad management doesn't. So once you have bad management practices set in, what then? Well, then you need to retool the management practices. So like an update, you upload the update to the computer, to the BIOS, and then all of a sudden all those other problems go away because you've closed the access. Well, you've also re-engineered it so that it doesn't work in the old way. Now, I have also heard, look, all different stories from all different places, all different families, none of whom should be any families you know or anybody else. This is just like, I watch a lot of TV, okay? I've listened to a lot of stories. I've read a lot of books. Like some people say, how many books did you read? And when I say 400,000, they don't believe me. No, just kidding. But let's just say enough books to know a bunch of different stories. But look, this is no secret that families, even families have problems. Right? Everybody knows the story. The father, the grandfather did this, and then there's the son, and then the son, the father they don't like each other, and the business falls apart. Or the son does something else. The son becomes a boxer, or he becomes a sailor, or something crazy. But how about this? It works out for both of them. The father isn't pulling his hair out because somebody's there that doesn't want to be there. And the son finally finds his niche. And however implausible, it works out for him, and he's a really cool person, and they get along to this day, and it's really okay that things worked out that way, finally. Why not? See, if we talk about change and randomness, how random is that? But again, we have these ownership structures that have sort of that management practice built into it that can lead to these types of deficiencies, ethical deficiencies, I think is one way of putting it. I mean, technocratically, I would say it's not deficient, although it's deficient in certain areas on purpose, but that's an ethical deficiency. Which is to say, to state one thing, or assume people would assume you have the authority to have public order and then not work in the interest of public order on a policy level. So I think those types of incongruencies don't speak for good management anywhere. So if you can depersonalize that and present that in an abstract way, but maybe apply it to your individual instance or environment, then maybe that could be useful for you, but maybe it isn't. Maybe you still have to work on the ethical principles, which is, even if you're an unethical person, which presumably many of you are, the job of the good philosopher is making it understandable to you why an ethical system is better than an unethical one. But I think thieves, for example, they understand good security, right? They appreciate it more. So even if you're thieves, why not listen to a couple of different stories where it's possible to have a more enlightened management practice than the one that is currently in play? Just on an abstract level, there's no fingers being pointed, nobody's calling anybody any names at all. Just as from the standpoint of human to human compassion for all civilized people of the entire planet, essentially. To put in the work, the effort, to put one's foot forward and propose such a thing, despite the madness that is all around us, I think does differentiate one citizen from another a little bit, and yet everyone wants to focus on the person and not on what is being proposed, which is the essential thing. But if one is not open to any type of dialogue, then there's really no point in continuing to engage with people that are just hostile from point zero. They don't see any point in improving things. And I would say that a certain level of mismanagement does convey that message, even if it's unintended, by the people too incompetent to notice how bad things are being managed. So you can see these types of loops can get started, but they can also be stopped. Part of the process is taking note of what is actually happening versus what we would expect to be happening or what we would want to be happening. In fact, what is actually happening, so that we can course correct into, let's say, better ways of doing things that are responsible and ethical, not just the label ethical, truly ethical, truly. Like, we thought this was ethical, but this is even more ethical, so we're going to do that instead. Type of impulse towards positivity, truly good changes, and not this just appearance of that. Which again is not helpful, especially if it doesn't deliver, or delivers the opposite of that in the form of sadistic practices. That's what is causing the whole shrinkage. That's it. Here, you want to explain it on the level of biological life forms? This force is this directed negative energy beam is causing things to fall apart and also go away. So you had 10 gerbils, but the sadist took out a hammer and smashed 4 of them. So now you only have 6, and the next day maybe only 2, and then, right? But it's everybody else's fault than the person. So I think if you just are able to classify things and categorize things, and then also dispense with things that are not helpful, but that also does mean having the strength to be introspective on a level that you can realize that you might be engaging in counterproductive behavior, even if you're convinced that couldn't possibly be true, because you're a smart person that has been educated in this way of seeing things that might not be the way it actually is. Can you step away from an orthodoxy? Now, this is the conversation that I can have with people on my level in the academy. But certainly it's much higher than any civilian would normally engage in if they're doing something meaningful, like designing new bicycles or digging foundations for factories or doing all these other things that are so tremendously beneficial to all of us. You have to think that the engineer who puts in all the work, he only benefits to the extent that he can benefit, but he knows how much benefit he's really bringing to civil society. When the bridge gets built, the engineer knows how much traffic that bridge can hold or will hold. He has a couple of ideas. So that's the spirit you need to have to approach these types of design problems, essentially, that take a more holistic way of seeing things and understanding things, to realize that, yeah, the people that are distributed or distributive are the people you want in government, not people that are consumptive. And so I think that can be put into psychological terms, that even the impoverished secular class could accept on their own terms to be valid and therefore ethical and humane, as well as the most civilized way forward. I was watching a small documentary on how one man perceived 2440 to be in 1771. But he mentioned during that time that they were envisioning modern societies, and he said, I forget if it was a commenter or not, he said there would be no other classes engaging in luxurious exercise, and he named the monks. He said there would be no monks. Everyone would be engaged, that's it, in productive work. And then he mentioned the monks, and then considered it to be a luxury that a society affords. And I think that's it's very dangerous when we have people in these postmodern times adopting those types of conceits, because they also had those types of conceits. Certain worldly people had these conceits, people who thought themselves smarter than your average bear, people with imagination. But again, maybe they didn't have a good connection to the monks, or maybe the monks in their region weren't well organized. Maybe they had lost their way. Maybe society was not in a very good position because there were all these different types of weird economic problems that came out of nowhere, right? Somebody found gold somewhere, inflation would shoot up, there's a war between some duke and this other baron, then all of a sudden you can't find any wooden barrels anymore. Like, just really weird conditions that didn't have the longest time frames. It was more of like get while the getting is good type of mentality, which is pretty practical. Like, something shows up, you have a lot of something, well, get it while it lasts, because who knows what tomorrow would bring type of mentality. Okay, some people were shrewd. Like, they would, when the guy with the sugar came in, they bought 2, 3, 4, 5 extra kilos. They had money for that. But they tried to get a good price, and then they put that someplace. Because they were wise. Maybe something like that happened in their childhood, maybe, right? So they learned to be shrewd in that way. Although, is it shrewd? It really depends. Imagine you're going into a mini ice age versus you're going into a mini warming period. Things going to get better, things going to get worse. Well, it also depends on how long you have to live, which might be delusional based on where you are in life. Young persons can sometimes think they have their whole lives in front of them when they don't. And old people tend to think they could kick the bucket any day, but they end up living a lot longer than they expected. Coasting into their 90s, although, in their 70s they were worried about this and that. At some point they stopped worrying and they just started living the way they were, with what they have, which might not, is here today and gone tomorrow. But coming back to this conceit, I think it's also a misperception. Certainly from that time, for whatever reason, it was probably historical context, local context, but I do not consider it a luxury to have monks. It's more like the society has the luxury to have monks. The more monks it has, the more luxuries it has. In the form of spiritual counselors, you want to give them a different name just to make things a little bit more neutral, a little bit more up to date. Spiritual guides, religiously capable men that are dedicated to the practice, not just preaching it, but practicing it, to be able to preach it. Just like if you are a new practitioner of Kung Fu, you cannot just say you're that because you wrote a book on it. You're either practicing it and can show it and can teach it and can learn during that journey. Or you're not in the game, you're not practicing the sport, you're actually not that athlete. You can't say you're a triathlete if you're not practicing all three sports, right? Or you can't say you're in a triathlon if you don't do all three things. So I don't see why modern people are so deluded to think that they understand why a triathlete needs to be trained thoroughly in all areas where they're competing, and So do spiritual practitioners to get through everything that life can throw at you, including old age, sickness, and death. So you could think of it as like fertilizer or the minerals and nutrients in the soil, some type of organization that replenishes the soil, teaches good practice, is the foundation of all agriculture, which is to say all food, which is to say all sustenance, all nutrition, all well ordering of all things. Because you must have well ordered bodies, minds, hearts, and moral, ethical principles and their enforcement. But not just enforcement from outside, the cultivation of ethics within. So the people doing that very valuable work should not be considered expendable or unproductive. How can you be productive if you don't have spiritual matters squared away? See, the conceit and assumption of worldly people is that that's just a given. But as we know, that certainly is not true. It's not true for the individual. It's not true of their lives that start out this way and then change that way, and then this happens and that happens, right? And it's not true on a social level, where for a social system, for it to work, all participants need to have common fundamental ethics. But those ethics should be intuitive and natural and not forced and abstract or inverted. So we would have to review the sadistic element of this current time and perhaps replace it with a compassionate one instead. And yet, on the other hand, not overly compassionate with the wrong things. Certainly not. Nobody's saying, take all the fertilizer and dump it on the wheat pile. That wouldn't be really smart, would it? But how about the right amount of fertilizer with the right amount of perhaps forestry grade trees planted 3 meters apart? So that they can grow under those harsh conditions that creates the microclimate for the reseeding of the native forest species. And yet even then you have to take action as far as curtailing the grazing of that area is concerned by fencing it off or doing other measures. And also removing invasive weeds that will want to set up shop first because they can usually expand further under those conditions, which are in a transitional period because it's going from a degraded landscape. It's returning to a let's say luxuriant one, right? A abundant one, an ancient one, an unblemished one, a resilient one, a dynamic one, a robust one. But of course, the seedlings, the forestry grade, that's very easy to say, but who gets to qualify that? Well, those little guys have to do a lot of work, don't they, under unfavorable conditions. But afterwards, once the reseeding takes place, things just take on a whole new dynamic. And at that point, it's really unstoppable. You go 10 years, talking 10 years in, if it's been managed properly, unstoppable. I mean, there are some things that might stop it, but you're talking about forces of nature at that point. So it really is as simple as that. This is why I so cherish all things having to do with horticulture. Because there's so many practical, wonderful lessons for all of us to learn and to be inspired by. So coming back to the point, the point is no, monks are not some luxury that society was better off without. In fact, quite to the contrary. Also, monks, they need to be practicing monks. So it's not just preaching, it's not talking, it's not bookishness, it's practice. So it is that dedicated. And there should be a very good understanding of why that is the case, using the triathlete as an example. The triathlete cannot really be doing all things like normal people in order to compete at a high level or perform at a high level. I like that better. Performing at a high level without competition. See, we always, when we're thinking of sports, we're thinking of the triathlon in context of the other competitors, but we should stop doing that. The spiritual practice is the individual practice, which is to say it is for the individual practitioner. Your pocket knife, guess who that is for? Your pocket knife, your multi-tool, that is your multi-tool. Don't lose it. Also, you need to know how to use it. You need to carry it with you at all times. You need to not lose it. You need to have something that you can wear it comfortably. Maybe it's a pocket. Maybe it's some type of specialized harness. Depends on your practice, how comfortable you are, how proficient you are with your own tools. And it's of course about skillful living as well. You can still be a practitioner without having to practice on all different types of crazy things. If you're not in a thorn bush, then thank God right now. Just say thank God, because they're out there. And with or without your multi-tool, but let me tell you, with your multi-tool, it's a lot better. But maybe you don't just have that tool, you have your, maybe it's just a long knife or a machete, right? Maybe it's a mix. It's something between the two that works better for you. But you know why, because you've been on that journey. But the people that didn't know why, maybe they can pick a pretty good choice right off the bat if they talk to people who know what they're talking about. And so you can see how people could learn in training in that way, or they can also learn in the spiritual practice that way. In fact, that's how they learn in spiritual practice. So you want to start a fire with a bow and a string? Let me show you. I use this type of stick now, right? I have this type of point, and then here, look, I carve this little channel here so that the embers can flow without being hindered. And so even in windy conditions, this can be put into a little puffy bowl, a starter, and then you can blow on that till it gets started, and then you can use that for your fire. But it's a multiple step process that requires skill in each step for the process to work. And sometimes it can get stalled when you're practicing. It can get stalled in the middle steps that I just described that sound so easy. See, and if we were to just keep it on a bookish level, that would be it. I would ask you to repeat what I said. You would say that, and then you would not practice. But this practice is the opposite of that practice, where the emphasis is placed on the practice and not on the words you heard that you think you know that were put together, and now you have this conceit that you think you know. But that is usually delusional. And so we don't really start with I and me and mine or thinking per se, but letting things sink in over time, drop by drop, realizing that we are limited in our human capacity to understand everything. And yet we have this desire to want that, to be in control, to control everything. Control your computer. Control what somebody texts you. Control outcomes. Control that this person falls completely in love with you and this person stops hating you. Control, control, control. Why won't they give me applause? Why are they booing me? Control. But you see, these things are out of your control. And so if you are trying to control something's out of control, how painful do you think that can be? Somebody grabs onto a lion. I'm going to control this lion. What happens to such stubborn people? Oh, see, there's laughter in the back. I can hear. Yeah, they're in for a ride. But it was also simple. It was also simple. They just had to refrain from saying, I'm not going to try to control this. I'm not going to put it up for debate. I'm not going to try to change things. I'm just going to drop the desire to try to control things outside of myself. And why is that? Well, because it's a wise policy based on the truth that everything outside of yourself and even things inside of yourself are not really under your control. So we know this when we are on a boat in a river. Of course, we know. We have the boat sort of under control, but sort of not, depending on the circumstances. Oh, there's a big wave. Oh, where am I going? All of a sudden, I thought I had everything under control. But then the wave goes back down, and then I'm in a completely different place. I thought I had everything under control. And then it goes really deep into the water, and then it comes back up very quickly. I didn't expect that at all. I thought I had that under control. So, and this could go on and on and on. This one could actually be like a music video, which is funny, like fast and funny like that. Where somebody thinks they have things under control, and then finally they say, you know what, I don't have to have everything under control. In fact, I'm not going to try to control everything outside of me. That doesn't say I'm going to accept everything outside of me. Certainly not, but I'm not going to blame myself for certain outcomes that certainly were out of my control, despite my best efforts. A lot of people like to put it that way, to maintain some form of, I won't say egotism, but self-respect, some dignity perhaps. Maybe, why not? I think it's an elegant way of putting it. You can wish other people all the best in the world. It doesn't mean things are going to go right for them. Especially if they're in a bad way and don't seem to think that, or would rather rationalize what they're doing than stop what they're doing. Especially when wise people tell them to stop. But they go anyway. What happened? I thought I was in control. And they jumped in front of traffic and ran over flat like a pancake. You know, with those tire marks? Stuck. Like flattened SpongeBob after the 18-wheeler. And it was also avoidable. But then, what part of your life is perfect? So, I mean, it's not necessarily funny for them, it's not funny for you, but life isn't supposed to be funny. It's not really a comedy. It can be a comedy if you can reach that level of detachedness, which is a good thing. But it certainly isn't all the time, is it? Sometimes it can get pretty frightening, pretty convincing, pretty gripping, pretty real, as they say. And yet, when has life never been pretty real? It's always been real. It's just real in different ways. We like to daydream when things are normal enough, and then when it's not normal enough, then we have to wake up, but we don't want to. We'd rather just stay asleep. Stay in our comfortable parameters of any type of normalcy we could have possibly cocooned ourselves in to protect us from some of the worst savageries that are certainly out there in the forms of misguided living. I also think this model of working, I mean, it's great, like working from, 16 to, they say 66 is the retirement age. I mean, they call that a win, but then there's people that want that good at like 86. I mean, it really just depends on the nature of your work and then how much work is required and under what conditions. I think all of these matters need to be understood in more humanistic terms and less in economic terms, because it doesn't make any sense if you're paying higher wages but there's still nobody going into those professions because life has been made so difficult for the people of those professions on every imaginable level. Outside of doing the work, which they usually don't help in making that any better either. Especially if their hearts aren't in the right places and that's sort of what you're dealing with. So And unethical political leadership is bad political leadership. That's just a simple way of putting it. But you'll get unethical leadership if you have unethical people in unethical systems. And so you need to have ethical systems to turn that corner and start having good things done in a good way, uh, kind of way. So no, what I'm saying is certainly not by any means a wild or radical in any way. It's just sort of how human societies grew up over time, as being more focused on mutual survival and less on predation of what card-carrying members, ID'd people. I mean, how flat of a human being is that? And yet they want systems like this to maintain their credibility over time. That's sort of the problem. So, yeah, mostly you're dealing now with, the worst social engineers that have ever existed. And the consequences of that. But of course, when we're talking about tyrants that don't care how the other side gets wrecked, then this is just one zany expression of that. That probably became discredited like 3 days ago at least, but I'm sure by the time anyone doesn't hear this or does, it could have been completely stamped out, but certainly not in this time. In the most surprising of places, but this is just how things can go. Like what happened when the plague was spread in Venezia, right? Where were the reporters reporting on that? Like who survived? Who was living in those creepy buildings where all the dead bodies were in that were still super contagious? So does it really matter like who was making wooden buckets or flower pots? Yeah, 13th century. 13th century. They weren't complaining about monks in those days. They were lucky to find some of them. Those that did were lucky to find them, weren't they? And what is a nice part of that story is that the aristocrats of the time, they knew the value of good monks. And they built their abbeys and everything else. They had their legal protections and their status and their authority, and they're the ones that really made a lot of the positive changes, including changes to scholarship in general, which is conveniently overlooked by the disconnected technocrats of today that have no tie to the past at all, except in the form of memory wars. So we're really talking like a second class kind of alternative reality to human being. Willing to fight to the death for the supremacy of world history. What? Why? Well, the politics of it. See, you never forget the vulgar anger. People want to paint themselves with little golden pictures. They want to wear gilded frames. The farther back, the better. But okay, it's understandable. But you can't destroy all the sciences based on that. But I'm sure it's been attempted before, which is why we don't really have all those wonderful books and those papyrus scrolls. Like, I really have the feeling that Ephesus was a lot worse than people think. You know, the Celsius library there? See, how many of the dummies of today don't know a damn thing about that? Well, let's see a raise of hands. Whoa, look at that. No hands at all. Oh, there's one. See, the difference between a scholar and some type of politically motivated person is that the scholar is really interested in knowing the truth, or as close to the truth as one can get, so that one can make the correct inferences based on that, so that one does not make a mistake. And yet these are all pursuits that the Buddha did not recommend at all. So looking back into my past, I feel somewhat guilty thinking that I thought in a more worldly way before than I do now. Whereas if you can keep it in a literary sense, you can learn from it or not. You certainly shouldn't put yourself into the roles of historical personalities for the sake of some type of aggrandizement or ego-satisfying measures. But this is what happens in a worldly place sometimes in some places, and sometimes it goes back. Sometimes it goes away for 40 years, then it comes back 40 years later. Yeah, Mozart, nobody knew about him until somebody discovered him really 100 years after his death. And it was a slow increase, like a slow unraveling of the whole phenomenon of Mozart, and then the interpretations, and then returning to the source material again, right? Going through the biographies and then doing all those different types of cross-checks to come to some type of more fundamental understanding of what was really going on at the time, and but also not necessarily sticking with the original version, allowing those playful adaptations, those essays, playful experimentation. There's really nothing to be said against that in literary circles, so why not in theological ones or administrative ones, or a combination of places that value the spoken word and ideas more than they do politics in a barbaric sense. Helpful practices, that's a great topic. So how about the helpful practice of Gera hands? So you take your two hands, open them up so they look like an open mouth, and then put the beak of your right hand into the soft part of your other hand, and so you have sort of, it looks like two arrows, one pointing left, one pointing right. That's Geras. And see, we can think of Gera also like Yana hands, like Gera, Yana, sort of related. And see, we're going to change the directionality of our thinking. If we were thinking unwholesome thoughts, we will detach immediately. With the Gera hands and the breathing and the walking, we can instantly change our point of view. And so if something was bothering us, we drop that. And we hold the Gera hands and we think in that way. Directionality is optional when it comes to attitudinals. If you are worried about a mistake, it was not a mistake. It was a learning experience. Learning is not a mistake. But if you see learning as a mistake, then you're seeing it mistakenly. There is just skillful and unskillful behavior and thinking. That is all. Chance and randomness are not in your control, but Gera hands are. You can also do the Gera hands in the lying position. Should you be resting, you can rest with the Gera hands. Which means, were you having a bad day? Well, now you can change your mind about that. This is your little way of doing it. Just your little practice. You have a bunch of different ones, but you might be doing the lying Gera hand practice, and nobody even needs to notice, because what's there to notice about individual practice? If it's not within a company that should or would or can understand it, best to keep it your own practice, own way of doing things. No need to teach. When one does not know the way oneself, one just knows one good practice that might have good effects. That's it. And it's so low-key, it doesn't look like anything except that somebody has their hands on their chest or on their stomach. So, but I like that connection. I think that is a possible close explanation. And so it's one of those things, you can use it depending on the time. Is it an appropriate time? Do you have the time to do it? Well, then do it. Do you need 3 hours to get into a state of solitude that you can finally release your grip on some type of attitudinal, or can you do it quicker, more automatically, if you get into the practice of using it on your off time, so to speak, your on time, off time? I like people who are on the clock and are also on the practice. That means they're really practicing, but the clock is sort of working for them. Those are people that are where they should be mentally, despite all the randomness in life. Because they're not really tied to a fixed outcome. And right now is okay for right now, isn't it? And can it be okay a little bit more? and in a whole bunch of different places for a whole bunch of different reasons that nobody knows really why. Have you ever had that, like looking back, there were 5 years put together that were really good years, that were just, everything just seemed to be so logical. And everything's so nice, everyone's so friendly, and everybody doing well for themselves. And then 5 years later, totally different. Nobody even remembers the good time. So these things happen, not because people want them to happen, but because a couple of people pull it off for a time. And a lot of people just have to see where the breadcrumbs do fall, and be thankful for the good times, wherever they may be, with or without a concept of things or ownership. Because then we start getting into things like system credibility or not. If the system isn't really credible, then who owns things? Who's the owner around here? Your fire alarm isn't working right, although it's not up to code. But what? The owners are the people enforcing the code? What? So sometimes things can just get that crazy that you got to do a reboot. And consider doing everybody a favor, because systems that don't really work or produce the opposite of what they're supposed to produce really aren't systems worth perpetuating or propagating, at least in their current form. That is not to say that good governance is impossible. It isn't. But certainly there are worse ways to govern. But there's also a lot of better ways. And you can believe that, and that can also be true. And you can have absolutely zero animosity towards any other groups at all. In fact, you can wish all life forms well. Say, I wish all life forms are well and content. When you say that and really mean it, it's really true. No matter what other people say, that can't be true, he can't do that. Of course you can. You've been too insulted? Well, guess what? You just forgot that for 5 minutes, and now guess what? You can do it too. Whoever's telling you or whatever's telling you to hold on to a grudge, that's not a good voice. It's got not a good logic to it. There's nothing good about it. It's not honorable. It's a vulgar thing. Also, very vulgar, stupid people do it for all different types of reasons, like also the wrong reasons. Sometimes, look, 50%, there's a 50% chance you've got the wrong reasons. And the other 50% are absolutely wrong, because you should never be holding on to a grudge for any reason, other than the vulgar ones that we all know, but those are not the good ones. People that hold on to grudges for a long time and do some bad things based on them, they are not going to heaven, friends. That type of loony logic doesn't check out up there. And it doesn't check out down here either. So beware of going so far into the past that you find something you bring back to the present to wreck your day and everybody else's day with. Because guess what? That's not skillful. No matter how you want to package it, or sell it, or push it, or use it, the net effect is negative. So, understandably, some people will not care. Like in the caring department, they have no Fs. Okay, so we already can understand where this is going and how the problem can become even a bigger problem if people don't address it in the right way, which is with individual practice, individual enlightenment, individual progress. An individual purification program that gets all the gunk washed out of your gonectozoids that are glooped up, clumped up. They've got all this stuff thrown on it. So that's why the wires keep short-circuiting up there. Not only is your programming totally wrong, but even your emotions have been rewired. So that some people, instead of feeling the sparks under their butt, they feel like they're being burnt alive with some type of criticism rather than seeing it as a call to general improvement of general conditions, individual, social, or otherwise. So you can always scale good ideas up, just like you can scale bad ideas up. Bad ideas based on memory wars is going to lead to other wars. So now I understand certain people instrumentalize things, but as far as philosophical principles go, it just doesn't seem pragmatic to use those things unless you want those things not to happen. But I do understand a lot of people are in some type of state of doublethink as far as that is concerned, and that's somewhat concerning because you shouldn't have doublethink in areas like that they really do matter so much for civil society. But again, we always have to wonder what audience are we talking to, because if people do hate civil society, which we might as well assume that's the truth, that they're really not interested in doing anything good for civic society, just sort of replicating it passively enough is about their highest goal. And so that's how you should see their types of political operations, just pretending to be politics. None of the solutions, but similar kinds of friends. And so you could just see it like in terms of blight, just like some type of fungus that grew up on top of a pile of grain. So it is off-putting. They do spread, but you can remove it and probably not contaminate the whole pile. Just have to change the storage conditions and let a little bit more air in, maybe. That should keep down on the mold problem. Now, just as a playful experiment, maybe use the directionality of Jera combined with the solar symbol, and then you're dealing with ice. So the ice symbol, and then melting. So you're thawing out, thinking of yourself as in a freeze, and just thawing out of that and giving yourself time. Have you ever been on like a mountain pass where you see those icicles melting, but you can feel the warmth of the day, that the sun is becoming brighter? It might be spring. And these things are pretty big, and it's coming from a hard winter, but you just know that the power of the sun, see, Gera plus the solar symbol onto the ice, you get into this thawing process. So let's also not forget that the freeze is part of a healing process. It's like a shock. So you were thrown out of a car. Well, your body has been injured maybe in multiple areas, and it's been such a shock to your nervous system that your brain doesn't know what's happened really. It needs to figure things out. And so it's sort of shutting down your higher cognitive faculties. So it's a form of shock. Now here's the other thing. Look, if you're a highly sensitive person, HSP, it could happen for any reason. You could have really fallen like deeply in love with a rock star. Okay? Just the dumbest of stereotypical things. And guess what? He didn't return that burning love you had for him. And so now your heart's broken. But because you take your heart so seriously, that it was just such a devastating rebuttal of your self-worth, then you can see how people that are very sensitive can go so wrong on that road till they beat themselves up, essentially. And so it's sort of like that, stuck on a wrong way of seeing things. So with Gera, you reclaim your directionality. And with the solar symbol, you use mudita and metta and loving kindness and wellness, well-wishingness to any and all beings. That sort of helps warm up the ice that needs to thaw. Sometimes drop by drop, but you just know, you have that feeling that it's the right type of temperature to thaw through ice. And then ice itself, that's very pure. All of those, that melting ice has very pure water. It's very beautiful. It's very crystal clear. So it's part of the purification process. You can't have dripping, thawing water unless you have ice, but that's not going to thaw unless you have sun, and you have the directionality of the sun to perhaps accelerate the process. So you can see how that could be a healing loop for directionality after you've established directionality, but that's sort of one of the first things you have to do. But see, that's where we start getting into these jhana arguments. People are like, oh, well, let's just get into jhana. I see it more as a practical thing that gets you dealing with perhaps more subconscious freezes and things of that nature, so that you involve it into the healing process. Because it is a healing process. So people are in that healing process because they're in the shock stage, but it's the very beginning of it. But they might continue to stay in it if they continue to have the attitudinals that led to that situation in the first place. So it is about disengaging with Gera, right, Yana? Releasing the clutch, putting it in neutral, and then slowly letting the engine rev down and stop. And then you only re-engage on your own terms and at your own speed. And it's not a problem. It's not like any of your gears are busted. It's just you don't apply them towards any old thing for any old reason like you might have in the past. Like, oh, here's this extremely annoying, off-putting thing. Other people don't mind it, but it does bother you. So being compassionate towards yourself as a living being, you're going to just give yourself that extra padding, perhaps, if that's what you need to sleep. Because other people, they think the one pad is enough. How about this? They don't need any pad. They can just lay down on concrete and they're fine. And I'm also not kidding. I'm talking about monks as well. They have that rice mat and that's it. So I'm not about to call that practice into question, but on the other hand, one needs to know whether one is too far into the austerities that it hurts one's practice. When, for example, in this one case, it might be that because of some significant injury, perhaps, a certain little bit of comfort is brought in to bring things more towards the middle way, the easy way, the simple way, the relaxed, comfortable, not so demanding way. But of course, the point is not to be too comfortable. Being too comfortable is also overdoing it. So everyone needs to know for themselves. Now, I'm not saying that people should let their extravagant desires then run wild, but certainly there's a principle, the middle way. So what is the middle way? And maybe you can take the middle way and make it half the middle way, and then another half, and then your middle way is, again, has taken a different directionality with Gera, with jhana. You decided to focus your energies here instead of there. Maybe you can't get away, maybe you don't need to get away. Maybe it's a flight or fight type of scenario that people get into if they get themselves worked up about things that might be attitudinal in nature, or at least have a large attitudinal component to it. So, for example, all these terrible people with all these terrible ideas all of a sudden institute all these terrible policies. That's terrible, right? It's really terrible, but worse things have happened. So, what do you do after a forest fire or during a forest fire, or what do you do when there's a transitional period of, let's say, loutish type of incongruent and contradictory interests? How did they do it in the 13th century? That was a pretty long century, wasn't it? 100 years. So you have a bunch of really misguided people in responsible positions. You're on the whitewater rapids of messed up stuff happening or about to happen or soon to happen. So, different epochs can have different defining characteristics to them. And of course, different people see things differently for different reasons at different times. There's different perspectives on every different thing, is there not? If you're willing to admit it, if you can view it with pure neutrality, things go up, things go down. I like that scene in the movie Labyrinth. Would you like to go up or down? Says, I've been traveling in this direction, I might as well continue going down. Like she said, down. Yeah, down. Down and out. You down the first flight of steps and you thought you were at the ground floor, and the staircase got even longer and more crooked and messed up. Crumbly. Like you step on it and like half of it falls out. So how about that? The concept of the labyrinth is that you're trying to get to the center and then trying to get out. But there are no dead ends. Whereas a maze can have dead ends. People often confuse the two. But the concept of a labyrinth is pretty amazing because it's not just getting to the center that's complicated, it's finding your way back out. But it is centric. So people have said it is a metaphor for the interior journey so that you can get out. Or defeat whatever monsters, minotaurs maybe, lurking around the chitta, the heart and mind and soul and spirit, and also spiritual causality that might extend into past lives and future lives. So all of these dimensionalities are in play, and yet we have secularists that claim to have an authority over the truth, and yet are so misguided as to be considered political in a science that should not be political, or at least shouldn't be politicized in the way that it has. But who decides these things? People that believe themselves to be above the law, above ethics itself, because they're data-driven only when they say they are and not when they're not. So essentially the personality traits of that all bad people have just applied to the scientific fields and the political offices naturally as well, financial system. So that, of course, has a debilitating effect on the economy, and then you have the poverty and then the breakdown in healthcare systems. Life expectancy plummets, and life becomes a lot more difficult and some would say meaningless, depending on how you look at it. If you don't have equal opportunity or a working legal system, then there's really not much to do except get through life the best you can. And they don't quite care how one does that. So you roll like a pinball through all of the little ding-dings and dudung-dongs that they have set up for you, then good for you. But as far as they're concerned, they're playing on unlimited pinballs. They got those magic quarters, just keep showing up. No matter how many pinballs they gutter ball. So there's something to be said for enlightened leadership, but certainly present circumstances does not give any witness or account of it in this present time. But that does not mean that such things are impossible. But certainly the people that haven't been doing things so wonderfully are the last people qualified for re-architecting a glorious return to a magnificent beginning.